hybrid format. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For members in the room, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The committee clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your understanding in this regard. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, Sub 2, and the motion adopted on August 13, the committee is meeting to study the review of the foiled terrorist plot in Toronto and of the security screening process for permanent residence and citizenship application. I want to remind members that there is currently a Section 517 publication ban in place. A Section 517 publication ban prohibits the publication of any information, evidence, or representations made at or in anticipation of a bail hearing. Any bail conditions, reasons of the bail court, and any evidence or materials relied upon at the bail hearing are prohibited from disclosure. So I'd like to now welcome the witnesses. We have appearing today, we have the Honourable Dominique LeBlanc, Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs. Welcome, Minister. We have from the Canada Border Services Agency, we have Ted Gallivan, Executive Vice President on behalf of the President. From the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, we have Vanessa Lloyd, Interim Director. From the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, we have Sean Tupper, Deputy Minister. And from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Brian Larkin, Deputy Commissioner, Specialized Policing Services. For the second hour, we will have a slight change in the witnesses. So I'd now like to invite the Minister to make opening remarks. Please go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chair, thank you, and good morning, colleagues. Thank you for being here this morning to discuss this important issue. Your chair has introduced my colleagues, senior officials who are joining me this morning. Some of us are old hands at this table, Mr. Chair, but it is, Vanessa tells me, as our interim director of CSIS, it's her first time before this parliamentary committee. So, Vanessa, welcome to this important part of our parliamentary democracy, and thank you for joining us. As members are aware, Mr. Chair, the investigation and arrest of these individuals are the result of the efforts of Canada's national security, intelligence, and law enforcement partners. At the very beginning, I would like to take the opportunity, as I have said on other occasions, to commend the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, the Canada Border Services Agency, and their partners, the Ontario Provincial Police, the Toronto Regional Police Service, the York Regional Police Service, the Peel Regional Police Service, and the Durham Regional Police Service for their outstanding work together in this important case. The arrest of these two individuals is a great example of outstanding police and intelligence work. As new information became available, our national security partners acted quickly to keep Canadians safe. While I will gladly provide the committee with as much information as possible, of course, understanding Canadians' obvious interest in answers to these many questions, we must remember that we should, excuse me, I've had a cold for a number of weeks. We must remember that we should have these discussions in a manner that does not impair the Crown's ability to prosecute these accused persons or to police services' ability to investigate any or all of these circumstances in their judgment if they deem it to be necessary to continue those investigations. As I said, Mr. Chair, all Canadians deserve answers and transparency, and that is precisely what all of us aim to provide today. This morning, I submitted to the committee in English and French a chronology of events that was worked on by the security agencies represented with me at the table, and of course our Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Department colleagues as well. Members will note the chronology shows that it was only in June of this year that CSIS became aware of the potential threat posed by these subjects. For greater precision, I was informed by CSIS on July 24th of this year, in a briefing where senior officials of the RCMP were also present, that CSIS had been assessing the threat from these individuals based on recent intelligence. Upon learning this information, CSIS took immediate measures to assess and obviously mitigate the threat. I was assured of and briefed on the close surveillance of the threat, including at the appropriate time by members of the RCMP who were positioned to act on any indicators of an escalating or imminent threat. And as you know, these individuals were arrested on July 28th of this year and are now charged with 9 serious offenses, including terrorism-related offenses, and are currently incarcerated, remanded into custody. This is the way that the investigative and national security system should work. Cela étant dit, il est important.
Having said that, it is important to inquire into how these individuals ended up in Canada in the first place. Security screening is the first, but not the only, line of defense against those who seek to enter Canada or to obtain Canadian status in order to harm our citizens or our national interests. A screening takes place in 3 stages: before a person reaches Canada, at the border, and, on occasion, after the person is already in Canada. Before an individual reaches Canada, the IRCC, the Immigration Department, the Canada Border Services Agency, and the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service work in close collaboration in order to carry out security screenings. Based on risk indicators, the Immigration Department identifies applications requiring a more in-depth security screening by the Canada Border Services Agency or CSIS. These 2 agencies use a variety of techniques and methodologies. They also rely on a robust network of international partners as they carry out their assessments. At the border, all persons wishing to enter Canada are subjected to a CBSA screening. They must prove that they satisfy the entry criteria. Decisions are made based on information available at the time of the person's entry. Officials in my department and at the Immigration Department are currently reviewing the files of the 2 individuals in question in order to understand exactly what information was available at the time the decisions surrounding them were made. Once we obtain this understanding, we will move rapidly to make the necessary changes to our systems so as to strengthen them.
Important for Canadians to know, Mr. Chair, is that our security services operate continuously, seeking out threats within Canada and threats that may come to us from abroad, and then they respond quickly and effectively. The fact that these 2 individuals are in jail and face serious criminal charges reflects the outstanding work done by the RCMP and their partners. Mr. Chair, our government's broader counter-terrorism efforts are designed to detect and prevent terrorism activities, obviously at the earliest opportunity. Together with our security and law enforcement partners, our government will continue to prevent, detect, disrupt, and respond to any suspected terrorist threats and activities, and hold accountable those persons who may seek to undertake such activities. And with that, Mr. Chair, thank you for your invitation. I imagine most of you have missed me a lot over the summer. You must be very excited to see me. Looking at your smiling faces tells me that this is a very happy reunion, and I'm looking forward to our conversation that will follow. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. We will now start our questions with Mr. Caputo. 6 minutes, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. And I echo your sentiments where you thank our security services and responders for foiling what sounds like it would have been a serious terrorist attack that would have impacted Canadians. Now, Minister, to be clear here, this person who is charged with terrorism offenses with his son, he arrived in February of 2018, correct? I'm going off the information you gave me, Minister.
Yes, in February 5th, 2018, the subject entered Canada at Pearson Airport.
And he made an asylum claim in June of 2018, correct?
Yes, he went to an immigration department office and made that asylum claim.
And he was granted citizenship in May of 2024, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And provided a work permit in September of 2018. That was that was the initial basis on which he was able to legally be in Canada. Is that right?
Yes, that appears correct from the chronology before the committee.
Okay. Permanent resident of September of 2021. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Now, you wrote me a letter on August 12th of this year stating none of this. So I'm just going to note here for the record that you said, Minister, that we couldn't comment on any of this, and then lo and behold, here today we have this vast chronology that has appeared just before committee. It seems odd that you would say you couldn't give us any of this information, and that here today we have all of this information from you. What we have here, Minister, is obviously a colossal failure. I'll be direct. How did somebody slide under the radar for so long, 2018 to 2024?
So just with respect to your initial comment, you're right. In August, I thought it was important, and I asked, as did my colleague Mark Miller, our officials to produce the detailed chronology. So I wanted to make sure that when we came to this committee and are able to talk about this publicly, we had the precise chronology that we could all rely on. So
that's not what you said in your letter, though, sir. You said in your letter that there was an ongoing investigation, and yet here we have this information. I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on how did this person fly under the radar for 6 years?
So this person entered Canada on the dates that you described, Mr. Caputo, and as are reflected in the chronology. The security services, CBSA, CSIS, and the Immigration Department did all of the existing security checks and the normal security checks, and including biometrics by the RCMP on a number of occasions. And there was, at the time that those decisions were made, no information that would have come to light to trigger what happened earlier this spring in terms of CSIS's investigation.
In fact, we actually had to hear from a foreign government about this. Isn't that right? That CSIS got information from a foreign government has been reported by Global?
You have been, Mr. Caputo, at this committee for some time. You know that the intelligence agencies are not going to ever discuss the sources of intelligence or information they get from partner agencies. First of all, it may be illegal to disclose that, but it's also very dangerous to the women and men who do that work, either at CSIS or in their partner agencies, to confirm the sources of this information. So I'm not able to give a definitive answer on that question, and you know that very well.
Equally as troubling as that answer is the fact that we as Canadians did not have this intelligence for ourselves. How is it that foreign governments know more than we do on Canadian soil?
I don't accept the premise of that comment. Every intelligence agency collaborates with partners around the world. The most effective and the most renowned intelligence cooperation would be the Five Eyes countries, of which, as you know, Canada is a member. And the information is shared between these security services on an hourly and daily basis, precisely because it makes our country safer, but we can also contribute and do often, and the great work done by CSIS, to the security of our partner countries as well. So that's a very normal security process that you understand very well.
With all due respect, Minister, you need to stop deflecting and start divulging. At this point here, you're saying You're not even confirming it. How is it that a foreign government knew more than we did in Canada about somebody that was on Canadian soil for 6 years? How is that?
But, Mr. Caputo, perhaps I wasn't clear in the previous answer. You understand very well, and I'm happy to ask the interim director of CSIS to explain the reasons why it is inappropriate, if not illegal, to answer questions around specific intelligence products, and more so because this is an ongoing criminal case. Some of this evidence, the prosecutors in their judgment may decide to bring before a court, before a jury at some future prosecution.
I'm not talking about the evidence. I'm talking about how the evidence was gathered. How is it that a foreign government knew more than our own government? That's what I'm talking about, not the evidence, sir. At the end of the day, this is what we have. We have somebody that came in here and was here for 6 years flying under the radar. We don't know whether this happened before, and we have no assurances from you whether or not this will happen again. You've deflected, you've diverted, and you've denied, and that is absolutely inexcusable to this point. Canadians deserve answers, and we are getting none. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Caputo. The minister can answer if he wishes.
Mr. Caputo can repeat those phrases and those words. It doesn't make them true. What you have here, Mr. Chair, is a case where 2 individuals were arrested and are now in custody facing 9 very serious criminal charges. This was a situation that could have presented a serious risk to the safety of Canadians, and CSIS and the RCMP and other police partners did phenomenal work. I am fortunate enough as the Minister of Public Safety, as I said, to be updated, to be briefed from time to time on some of these significant cases. That was the case for me on July 24th, and 4 days later, these people were in police custody. So I saw up close the very effective work that the RCMP, CSIS, and others did. So the premise that somehow this person flew under the radar, this person was arrested and is facing criminal charges and is in jail before any risk was presented to Canadians. And that's exactly the kind of work that we rely on our police services, the RCMP, and their partners like CSIS to do every day. And I'm proud of that work.
Thank you, Minister. We go now to Mr. MacDonald. Please go ahead. 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today and all your surrounding support. Minister, look, it's obviously a red flag for Canada and our government and all Canadians, and it's ensuring to hear some of your remarks. I do take issue sometimes when the opposition members say that other international security agencies knew more than we did, and certainly I'm for one to say, well, I'm not really too worried on who knows what, but as long as we, foiled a terrorist plot in this country, it doesn't matter. And I'm glad the Five Eyes all work together, including Canada, and in every regard. But Minister, Canadians need to understand and want to know, what's our interest in the details in this case are obvious, but we also want to ensure procedural fairness for a successful prosecution. So can you just elaborate on the processes that we're going to follow here so Canadians in layman terms can understand how we're going to get to the end of this and ensure that it never happens again?
So, Mr. MacDonald, thank you for the question. Thank you for joining us, I hope, from the great province of Prince Edward Island this morning. And you're absolutely right. As my colleague, the Minister of Immigration, has said, and I have said the same thing, and the officials with me today are working on precisely that, a review of all of the steps surrounding this case with the relevant dates to understand exactly who knew what and when. And are there changes or adjustments that need to be made in terms of these screening protocols? Our adversaries, threat actors that are seeking to do harm to Canada or to do harm to Canadians, are constantly evolving their measures and adjusting their measures. CSIS has talked about this publicly. So obviously the public safety portfolio and the agencies in the portfolio are also evolving measures to ensure that we have the very best measures in place to ensure the safety of Canadians. Mr. McDonald, your specific question around what reviews are taking place to ensure that we have this information. Perhaps Mr. Gallivan from the Border Services Agency or Ms. Lloyd from CSIS can talk about briefly the work they're doing. And of course, our colleagues at the Immigration Department are doing that same work and in some cases overlapping with us. Perhaps Mr. Gallivan could add something?
Just in terms of the review, so we're both reviewing these specific individuals and back testing what occurred, were procedures followed, and if procedures were followed, what changes to procedures may be required. We're also taking a representative sample of closed files that were similarly screened positive to see, in light of the information available today, whether there are changes to the procedures needed. And then, as the minister said, there's 3 lines of defense. The CBSA's first involvement is actually in the security screening process before people are issued a visa or status in Canada. In 2023, 7,000 people had various levels of concern expressed through that process. We have liaison officers situated around the world. Before people get on a plane, roughly 7,500 people were no-boarded before they even got on a plane to Canada. And then, kind of from a CBSA perspective, when you arrive in Canada in 2023, 35,000 people allowed to leave did not enter the country, and roughly 3,500 people, because of serious inadmissibility concerns, which are not just national security but organized crime and others, were stopped. And so I think what I'm trying to say is we do have checks and balances that work thousands of times a year, but we're asking ourselves the same tough questions about were the procedures followed, and if they were and didn't catch this individual, could different procedures catch them in the future?
Mr. Chair, if there's time, perhaps Ms. Lloyd can talk about CSIS doing some of that work in partnership as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The service has an important work in the security screening process, and I can provide assurances to the committee that the existing procedures are robust and that we take the time and necessary effort with the information available at the time to treat every file seriously to make sure we adequately and effectively execute our mandate and authorities under the security screening mandate of the CSIS Act. Thank you.
Mr. McDonald, you have a minute and a half left, or a minute and a quarter.
Thank you. Look, recently we've seen another jurisdiction, as recently as last week, I believe it was in Germany, where individuals have attempted to carry out terrorist acts in the name of Islamic State. Can anyone there speak to the experience or lessons that we may have learned from that situation?
Mr. Chair, I see Deputy Commissioner Larkin reach for a piece of paper. That may very well be because he has something he could add to that question. Brian, are you able to offer something?
Thank you, Mr. Minister. In that particular incident, no specific information, but generally speaking, as this committee would be well aware, the national security context, terrorism cases across the globe are becoming much more complex, much more frequent. I do want to highlight within Canada, though, the violent extremism is significantly on the rise. Between April 1st, 2023 and March 31st, 2024, where the RCMP has laid 83 charges against 25 accused persons, and 7 of those being young persons, which is concerning around the ideology and the radicalization. And when you look at this from a larger perspective, the number of charges year over year, 488% increase. And so the global context is changing significantly. It's something within the RCMP that we continue to evolve. Our integrated national security teams across the country, particularly located in large urban areas, to actually combat this. But as Mr. Gallivan and Madame Lloyd indicated, the important partnership is with our Five Eye partners and that global connection. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. On y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin. Monsieur Fortin, allez-y, s'il vous plaît, 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, thank you for being with us today. I believe that everyone agrees that this is an alarming situation. Obviously, it is possible to point fingers at people for certain gaps. And that is why our committee is trying to figure out what is going on. You spoke about the normal security screening processes which were adhered to. In the case of both the father and the son, normal processes were carried out. Can you confirm this, Minister? Mr. Fortin, the process in partnership with IRCC, because they're the ones who receive applications, the normal processes were followed in the case of both the father and the son, as Mr. Gallivan said. That said, we are carrying out a review to determine whether in these cases the security agencies could have found or identified something. And if that turns out to be the case, we will put in place measures to correct it. This is a continuous improvement process. You spoke about certain cases where there's a screening or a filtering carried out, and where IRCC will determine whether there's a need for a more in-depth screening. Can you confirm that you stated this in your opening remarks? Yes, that's correct, Mr. Fortin. Officials at IRCC receive applications. Mr. Gallivan could go into further details, but in certain cases, IRCC requests a more in-depth check. They might turn either to the Canada Border Services Agency or the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service to carry out further additional screening. This is how cases are normally identified. In the case of the two individuals we are speaking of, was this in-depth screening carried out or not? Was it requested and then was it carried out? To be entirely precise, because this question is at the heart of what we're studying today, I will ask Mr. Gallivan to provide details. First, I would like to note that we set out the referral criteria. So it's a partnership effort for asylum requests. Screenings are carried out for 100% of adult asylum seekers. Consistent with the chronology we submitted this morning in 2018 and 2021, the father, the accused, was subjected to a security review screening, including biometrics and a comparison of biometric data to RCMP databases. Yes, we have an automated system provided by our intelligence partners in Canada and around the world, which gives us names and scenarios and dates. Mr. Gallivan, I don't want to be impolite, but I only have about 2 minutes left and I want to use my time effectively. So you said that the in-depth security screening process was carried out in 2018 and 2021 in the case of the father. What about the son? Did the same thing happen? So twice, once in 2018, once in 2021 for the father. For the son, it was when he arrived in Canada in 2024, if I remember correctly. The son was only screened one time. So the son made his first application in July 2019, according to the chronology I have. Then he came to Canada in February 2020. Did you carry out an in-depth screening at that time? Regarding the son, he was screened when he applied for asylum at the Canadian border. The son requested a study permit in July 2019. He then came to Canada in February 2020, and he obtained a refugee status in July 2022. But you've mentioned 2024. It seems a bit delayed, Mr. Gallivan. Am I getting something wrong here? Did you get the dates mixed up? If you could please give me 1 moment to consult the chronology, I can provide you with precise information. What I can confirm is that the son was screened once through the same process under which the father was screened twice. I only have about 30 seconds left. I just want to make sure I understand correctly. was the in-depth screening requested for both the father and the son? Also, was it carried out? And third, when was it carried out? And what were the results of the screening? For the son, I think we're experiencing some confusion. I was very clear for the father. As for the son, I will come back to you. For the father, I can confirm that he was screened in 2018 and 2021. All procedures were followed in the normal ways. And IRCC was given a positive response. Thank you, Mr. Fortin.
Now to Mr. McGregor. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to join colleagues in thanking our witnesses and the Minister for appearing before our committee and helping guide us through this important study. Minister, my colleague Mr. Caputo touched on this. We received the documents via email, the chronology documents, only 50 minutes before the start of this committee meeting. My office, as every MP office routinely does when we're doing casework, we are often requesting chronology documents on behalf of constituents so that we can better understand the particulars of their case.
Excuse me, Mr. McGregor. I'm not sure the volume is level. Can the witnesses hear the questions? Okay, we'll turn up the volume and we'll start your time over again, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. I hope the volume is okay before I go into the questions.
It's good.
Okay, thank you. So, Minister, just on the fact that we received the email with the documents that were referred to, the chronology, we referred that email only 50 minutes before the start of this committee. And, my office routinely requests these types of chronologies to help us with the individual casework of constituents, and we often get that in very short order. So I guess a direct question to you, Minister, given how important this information is to aid this committee in a very important and now very public investigation into this matter, why did it take so long, given that the letter requesting this particular meeting, my letter was issued on August the 7th. Here we are on August the 28th. Can you give us, the committee, a reason as to why these documents were given to the committee so late?
Mr. McGregor, through the chair, thank you for the question and thank you for your participation this morning. I'm happy to see you. You referred to, as all of us as constituency MPs ask for chronologies from the Immigration Department with respect to particular files. That's a process that the Immigration Department endeavors to provide. I hope that colleagues will understand in this case, you're dealing with two individuals facing 9 very serious terrorism charges, criminal charges that are currently in custody. There is an active prosecution underway and a publication ban issued by the court. So the ability of the Immigration Department or even CBSA or CSIS to simply produce a timeline necessarily has to go through the filter of the RCMP to ensure we're not prejudicing inadvertently a criminal prosecution. I know lawyers from the Department of Justice were providing advice. The public safety senior officials were getting advice from lawyers. So recognizing that it should have been here earlier, Mr. McGregor, and for that I regret, but I wanted to make sure we didn't rush something that inadvertently became in a criminal trial a reason to perhaps have an adverse finding or an adverse result. And I wanted to make sure that the RCMP and the prosecutors of the Department of Justice were comfortable that we were releasing the maximum amount of information we can without in any way endangering a criminal prosecution or risking violating a publication ban that the court has seen fit to put in place.
Thank you. Now, I want to join you in also congratulating our intelligence service, our police services in a successful arrest before what could have been a very brutal attack on Canadian soil. And I understand that multiple departments are involved in internal investigations right now. Can you give the committee and indeed Canadians who are watching this committee a sense of, as Minister of Public Safety, what your expected timelines are for these internal investigations? And is there anything that you can publicly report that you've learned from this and any changes that you may have already set in motion to prevent this from happening in the future?
Mr. McGregor, thank you for that very good question. And you're right. The minute I was briefed on July 24th by senior officials of CSIS and the RCMP on this case, and then the RCMP subsequently updated me after the arrest took place, I think on July 28th, some 4 days later. The first thing that I asked officials was, tell me what processes are in place so that we can learn from this sequence of events, as I noted, and ensure that any adjustments we need to make in the screening process are imposed as quickly as possible. This work is being done with our partners at the Immigration Department. I believe the Deputy Minister of Immigration is here a little later this morning. My colleague Mark Miller will also be before this committee, I think, soon as well. The challenge is the work, because of the very integrated nature between the Immigration Department and CBSA or CSIS with respect to these screenings and information that triggers, as Ted indicated, further review. That process is necessarily going to be rigorous and thorough. I've asked them to produce for me as quickly as possible advice on what, if any, changes we need to put in place. I know my colleague, the Minister of Immigration, has also asked his officials to look with respect to the citizenship status of the father. That process also, again, I understand from comments Mr. Miller made publicly, is underway. The problem, Mr. McGregor, is the backdrop to all of this is this ongoing criminal investigation, criminal prosecution, potential further investigations that the police decide, and a publication ban. So the ability to talk about different elements of this work on the advice of lawyers and the RCMP
I want to get one final
is very limited.
It's related to this. Just in terms of our international relations, the European Union has its own database. I believe it's referred to as the Schengen Information System. Of course, Canada has its Five Eyes. Do you believe incidents like this are going to encourage your government to pursue better collaboration with Western democracies, such as the European Union, in how we share some of that information? Do we have access to the particulars of information databases like the Schengen Information System, and how do we collaborate with those different data sets?
Critical question. I'm glad, Mr. McGregor, you asked it. The best person I see in some CSIS briefings references to some of this information, but Vanessa is in the best position to quickly tell you. I think she can reassure you we have access to all of the intelligence and data we need to keep Canadians safe, but specific sets of data. Vanessa, can you help Mr. McGregor, perhaps?
Mr. Chair, as the Minister referenced earlier, in the complex threat environment that we are currently facing, partnerships are a very important tool to be able to counter threats of violent extremism as well as a range of other threats. As the Minister alluded to earlier, the service has many partnerships with countries around the world. In fact, over 300 partnerships for 150 countries around the world, and that includes daily information sharing through a liaison that happens through our intelligence professionals around the world, and leveraging information that can be shared from all types of data sets and collection by those agencies.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We'll start our second rounds of questions now with Ms. Landsman. Please go ahead, 5 minutes.
Minister, I'm going to jump right in my questions because you've had a month to answer these questions. But you said in your opening statement, I'm going to quote you, "This is the way that the investigative and national security system should work." Your government issued a visa to somebody who was allegedly in a 2015 ISIS propaganda video, who then planned a mass casualty event outside of Toronto with a target in our country's largest city. The RCMP foiled that plot with intelligence from the French. Are you really telling Canadians that that's how our system should work? He's been here for 6 years.
Mr. Chair, what I'm saying to Canadians is that the moment the government of Canada became aware of concerning information regarding this individual, All of the appropriate steps were put in place by CSIS and the RCMP, which culminated in the arrest on the 28th of July. And thank God, as Ms. Landsman said, the potential serious risk or violence was averted. With respect to the information regarding the immigration processing, the Immigration Department will be here later and are in a position to speak to the specific steps that an applicant, whether for asylum or permanent residency, and we're looking at the security check system.
Yes,
the
Minister,
security
by my count,
verification
there's
system.
about 6 security checks in the documents that you dumped on this committee 50 minutes before it started. Do you really think that the system is working if somebody like this, who's an alleged ISIS terrorist, who, if he was even a little bit more productive, would have resulted in mass casualties in Toronto? Do you really think that that's how the system should work? Do you really think that this is not a colossal failure of your government?
I am very proud of the work that the RCMP and CSIS did in thwarting this particular case. I think, as Mr. Gallivan indicated, if you look at the tens and hundreds of thousands of these cases that are reviewed every year as people seek asylum, submit asylum claims, or apply for various visas, we necessarily rely on the work of our security agencies. We're always looking at ways to strengthen and evolve that posture as the threat context, as Ms. Lloyd said, evolves. But in this case, I am satisfied that when the Government of Canada was aware or could possibly have been aware of this information, all of the steps were taken.
They were aware 6 years ago when he came in. And speaking of that, we heard speculation,
Ms. Glassman, you can't assert something like that if you're...
He's been here for 6 years. It's just a known fact from your own documents.
But you said to assert that people were aware of some information that came to light recently 6 years ago is wrong.
There is speculation that he was brought in under the Syrian refugee program. Is this correct, yes or no?
I'm not sure I can speculate on the particular immigration status and program, and I'm not sure what part of that might be subject to the criminal trial, but you could certainly ask the Immigration Department that question.
Do you believe that if he was brought under this, if he was brought in through this stream, the government promised increased screening on asylum seekers in this country? Do you believe that after everything we know today, that your government is doing its job on that?
But again, I don't want to give credence to the premise that you ask because I don't have that information. So I want to be very precise that you don't link his arrival to a particular immigration program. The Immigration Department, I think, can provide you with those facts. I don't have them, but I don't want, in answering your question, to appear to confirm that because I don't have that information. I am satisfied that both the security services and the RCMP with the Immigration Department have in place a series of rigorous screening and background checks that take place. You heard Ted talk about biometric screening, 6 different databases. We heard the interim director of CSIS talk about 300 agreements, 150 different countries. We have access to a great amount of information to keep Canadians safe, and we need to make sure that that information is used in the most expeditious way possible.
This person was brought into Canada 6 years before a terrorist plot was foiled, just days before they would have killed people in Toronto. And you're telling Canadians that you're satisfied with the screening processes in place.
As I said in my opening comments, this person and the nature of the allegations which ultimately led to the investigation and arrest came to our attention in June. And this person from that point on was obviously under the appropriate surveillance to ensure that any threat was mitigated and led to the ultimate arrest on the 28th of July.
Thank you, Ms. Landsman. We go now to Mr. Gerritsen. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. And I just want to start by thanking the committee for voting in favor of the Liberal motion to study this, because I think it's extremely important that we do that. I do take issue, Minister, both Conservatives who have asked you questions have referred to this as a colossal failure. I think that when you look at the various different organizations that have been working together, as you indicated, some 7 or 8 organizations, this is an example of how we should be working, how our organizations and agencies should be working together to get the best results for Canadians. I take issue, or I recognize that Mr. Caputo seems to take issue with the fact that this information was given to Canada that assisted us in coming to the conclusion that we did. But the reality is that Canada is a net importer of information. And as a matter of fact, if you think of all the agencies throughout the different countries that would work together, every agency would end up being a net importer. That's the whole purpose to coming together with other countries to share information, so that we can all benefit from it. That being said, can you talk a little bit about the risks, Minister, with disclosing the exact details of how CSIS may have become aware of the threat posed to us?
Mr. Gerritsen, thank you for the question. I can certainly, based on briefings I've had over the last year and a month from CSIS, offer a view, and perhaps Ms. Lloyd could add something. The reason why CSIS, or people like me who may have access to some of this information in the routine course of my job, don't confirm or identify particular sources or partner countries, as you said, that are sharing information with us, and we would, of course, share information that we gather with those same countries, is because it can, if we're confirming both the tradecraft, the way that these intelligence agencies gather information, if we confirm it's agency X and not agency Y, perhaps some of these bad threat actors will be able to identify either human sources who would be at huge risk, you can understand what that would mean, or be able to understand the tradecraft, the very sophisticated and effective way that CSIS and other agencies gather this information in order to protect Canadians. So that's why every previous government has been very prudent, and that's why the Security of Information Act also provides criminal sanctions for those that cross the line. But perhaps Vanessa can add something specific, or Mark?
Yeah, and I do actually have another question that maybe you could answer as well, Interim Director Lloyd. If I'm not mistaken, today's the 1-month anniversary since the individuals were arrested. Yeah, and I've personally never seen a chronology of events be disclosed to the public so quickly, despite the fact that I'm hearing from across the table that my colleagues are concerned about how quickly this was released. Are you aware, Interim Director, of any other cases where the details have been released so quickly to the public?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Honourable Member, it is our objective to be as transparent as we can with Canadians. Safety and security of Canadians and Canada's interests is of paramount importance to our organization, as well as to our security partners that join us here today. I can also say that it is equally important, as the Minister referenced, to be very vigilant with regards to disclosure of specific facts. As the Minister referenced, this can allow for our adversaries to learn where they went wrong, and providing a roadmap to them to change their methods will have the impact of making it more difficult to detect these threats. And equally, we hope to be able to preserve the capabilities, the methodologies, and the tradecraft that the Minister referenced of our service to address those threats.
And I appreciate that, but Minister, and I appreciate your diligence in answering that question. Are you aware, Minister, can you think of any other time that information was released this quickly as we've seen it released on this particular case?
Certainly, Mr. Gerritsen, not in the time that I've been minister, because I think we recognize, and my colleague Mark Miller said so publicly, we recognize the understandable questions that Canadians had when they learned following the RCMP news release of these arrests. I think it is reasonable for the government and for Canadians to ask, well, how could this sequence of events that we've laid out before the committee take place, and what can we learn from that sequence of events to ensure the very best measures are in place. So that's the work that's ongoing. But we thought it was important to lay that out for Canadians. But I hope people understood in my opening comments when I said very clearly that in the month of June, when CSIS became aware of some of this concerning information, they immediately took all of the necessary measures to ensure that the threat was managed or mitigated. I may not be using the right technical term. The RCMP were involved as well. And then we saw the successful arrest on the 28th of July. These people remain in custody, in jail. Their bail was denied. And there will be a prosecution. So in our system, and you know this very well, Mr. Gerritsen, that should be the objective in terms of keeping Canadians safe. And I'm confident that this case, once the details come out, I hope in a trial, once a jury or a judge is able to evaluate the evidence, Canadians will understand perhaps how these cases can successfully be handled.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm sure that the two former Crown prosecutors that are sitting at this table would understand that very well.
I've been missing my time here. On y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin. Monsieur Fortin, allez-y.
We'll now move over to Mr. Fortin. Mr. Fortin, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Minister, you said something came to our attention in June. According to the chronology, in June 2024, CSIS learned about the threat. However, the video that led to all of this was from 2015. So there was 9 years before the video that led to the arrest was filmed, and CSIS learned about a threat. Can you explain to me how this could be the case? How is it that our security services were unaware of this video before June of 2024? Mr. Fortin, it's an entirely reasonable question, and I understand why you are asking it. But just to be entirely clear, I asked Mr. Larkin why we are unable to comment on the supposed video. Mr. Larkin, can you please explain this context to Mr. Fortin?
Merci, Monsieur Ministre.
Thank you, Minister.
In addition to the emergence in the media of a video, it would be very difficult and irresponsible for me to speak specifically to the video, as we have an ongoing criminal prosecution, but we also have an active ongoing investigation. And so, Monsieur Fortin, it's very difficult to speak directly to any evidence or any information that may prejudice the criminal prosecution.
Thank you. I understand that we cannot talk about the video, so I won't talk about it. But I will ask you, were you only aware of the video in June 2024, or did the government learn about it earlier? Again, Mr. Fortin, I want to be very cautious. I can say to you, and I said in my opening remarks, that the moment that the government became aware of a threat, an elevated threat level, took place in June 2024. The details of who had access to what documents or what evidence. So it was really in June of 2024, Minister? The problem, Mr. Fortin, is that this is the precise sort of information which, as Mr. Larkin said, could end up in a criminal trial. That is why I'm being very cautious. I understand. But the effectiveness of our security services is being questioned here. At any rate, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We go now to Mr. McGregor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Minister, I also want to just ask a few questions about that video of June of 2015, and I understand the limitations you have in answering specifics about it. But to Mr. Fortin's point, June of 2015, those were the final months of the previous Harper Conservative government. So it's over 9 years ago. It is a publicly acknowledged video, given that it was reported in global news. I guess what I want to know is, broadly speaking, when videos like this are released to the public through various outlets, Minister, can you talk a little bit about the procedures that are in place nowadays? Because I'm sure the biometrics technology is very different in 2024 compared to what it was in 2015, that allows analysis of these videos and without jeopardizing the current investigation or the case before the court. I guess what lessons can you publicly tell us that you've learned from this experience that you may be now applying to future analysis of videos of this nature?
Mr. McGregor, thank you for that very good question, but because it is very technical and we don't want to bump into what Deputy Commissioner Larkin said, I think Ted Gallivan from CBSA can answer specifically for you in terms of the timeline and perhaps other technologies. I want to give Ted a chance because you'll get a precise answer that won't somehow allow me to end up stepping into a criminal trial where I shouldn't. Ted?
So independent of the criminal investigation, the CBSA, subsequent to media reporting, went and obtained an instance of this video from the dark web. It's part of the review. We're asking ourselves, questions about the procedures. And so I think I can confirm through a review of the treatment of these individuals that video wasn't available to the CBSA and officials who were screening the individual. I can say that the preliminary indications were that video of the father was not available in that instance that we found in 2018 or 2021, that it was only made available more recently. We are trying to see if there are other instances of that video or if it could have been obtained in other ways. And we're also asking ourselves the question around the feasibility of finding a video like that if you don't know about it. And so I think I can confirm to the committee that the CBSA has an independent copy of that, and we're being very careful in what we say, that we're looking at in the context of this review that the minister mentioned. And preliminary indications by the CBSA are that they certainly weren't available in 2018 and 2021, and that's the purpose of the review, is to get to the bottom of those questions. Preliminary review wasn't available during the screening in 2018 or 2021. Serious questions about whether it was findable if you didn't know what you were looking for.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor.
May I raise a point of order, please, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Caputo on a point of order.
Yes, thank you. It's been raised a number of times here that we only got access to this chronology that really should have been in our hands weeks ago. And I'm wondering, I believe that we probably have agreement from most people, but I would propose that the minister stay for 1 extra hour here, depending on his availability, because I think that there are still a number of questions to be answered. And we are also not hearing from the Minister of Immigration this week, which was part of our motion, and we haven't had an explanation for that either. Thank you.
Well, Minister LeBlanc doesn't answer to that question. That's for us. We did invite Mr. Miller, but he was unavailable. So I have an understanding that the minister can stay for a short while longer. I had envisioned 2 more 5-minute slots.
Mr. McKinnon, you may have the wrong understanding. I'm happy to be here. I agreed to come for 1 hour. I am leaving on a flight for New Brunswick, going almost straight to the airport with 1 stop at the Public Safety Department to sign a particular document. And I'm going to be spending tomorrow morning getting my monthly immunoglobulin treatment to boost my immune system, which I get. I don't intend to miss that, and I don't intend to miss the flight. So that being said, I'm happy to take a few more questions, but I cannot stay an hour. I've been an opposition MP too. I get exactly what Mr. Caputo is doing. We've certainly released all of the documents the moment they were prepared by the justice officials and that we could rely on them. So there's certainly no attempt to wait. The documents had to be translated. We wanted to, of course, respect that rule. But I don't know, Mr. Chair, if there is another few minutes. But I see that we're over 11 o'clock, and I will have to leave very shortly.
Thank you, Minister. So to finish the second round, we would do one more 5-minute question from the Conservatives and one from the Liberals. Would you be able to stay for 10 more minutes?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. That being the case, we'll go with Mr. Brock for 5 minutes.
Minister, 2 weeks ago, actually 16 days ago, the Prime Minister notified Canada that his government is taking the case very seriously. He secondly said this is a very serious situation that you, sir, as the Minister of Public Safety, would be doing a full follow-up to understand exactly how this happened. The Minister will share all that we learned in the appropriate moment. That was 16 days ago. You've indicated the process by which you've disclosed this 5-page document to committee, literally 20 minutes before the commencement. In my former career as a Crown attorney, if I tried to pull something like this in front of a judge, I would get a severe tongue lashing. This is not procedural fairness. This is highly, highly suspicious in terms of the timing by which you release that. So, moving on. I too want to talk about the video, the notorious video from 2015. According to Global News, they easily obtained a copy of that. It appeared to match the one that resulted in the aggravated assault charge that the RCMP recently laid. It shows a prisoner wearing an orange jumpsuit and suspended from a pole in a desert. A man wearing a black robe and a cap bearing the ISIS logo then hacks at the prisoner's limbs with a sword, cutting off his hands, cutting off his feet. His face briefly visible, he appears to be a middle-aged man with a henna-tinted beard. It is unclear whether the victim was already dead when he was dismembered. The video, titled "Deterring Spies," was published in June 2015 by the media arm of the ISIS branch in western Iraq, according to an expert. Now, we know that Mr. El-Didi received his citizenship in September 2023. I'm looking at the chronology under security screening note. Application was referred to CSIS for security checks in November 2023. CSIS returned a favorable recommendation. What type of message does that send to Canadians regarding our national security agency with a video that was widely distributed some 8 years previous, was not flagged against any advanced biometrics? The man's face was clearly visible. Is CSIS not tracking these videos? What other terrorists are walking the streets here in Canada right now waiting to commit terrorist acts on innocent Canadians? What the hell is going on?
So, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Brock, I would also think that when in your previous job as a Crown attorney, you would be commenting with the benefit of parliamentary privilege on something that you know very well may form part of an evidence, part of the evidence in an upcoming criminal trial. As the Deputy Commissioner of the RCMP said, I'm not sure you would, on the steps of a courthouse in the middle of an ongoing trial, have been as dramatic as you were for your social media clip now.
Sir, Minister, I am not a Crown attorney right now. I am a parliamentarian asking the tough questions that Canadians want to know. Why did our National Security Agency not flag this video 8 years prior and use the image of this terrorist, if not killer, who's dismembering limbs from the person in a pole? Why was that image not flagged against every other asylum claimant to ensure that there was adequate security checks being done? According to your note, CSIS cleared this individual, returning a favorable recommendation. How did that slip through? How did that slip through, sir?
So again, you're referring to alleged dramatic images.
It's not alleged. It happened. The video is not alleged.
I think we should be careful talking about criminal evidence, but as I said in my opening comments, and Ted Gallivan is going to be able to give you some precision with respect to the video and how security screening agencies came into possession of that information. At the time when the relevant decisions were being made by the Immigration Department and the security services were doing their work, the existence of that video or the information that you have recounted to the committee now was not available. And I think Mr. Gallivan can provide some precision in terms of why that was the case.
Well, it begs the question as to why.
Mr. Brock, that's enough. I think we should let Mr. Gallivan speak after the minister's gone. And we will go now to Ms. Demoff for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to be back on this committee. I was on here from 2015 onwards, and I have to say I'm really proud of the investments that the government has made to restore our security agencies to where they should be to deal with these kind of security threats. Someone recently said to me that under the Debt Reduction Action Plan, a fine fish net had become pretty porous because of cuts. And then one of the first things that we did when we got elected was update our national security framework and pass legislation that actually has given tools to our security agents to deal with these evolving threats, which have become more global in nature. They cross borders, so it's becoming more difficult. So, Minister, I have to say, I know you've only been in the role for a year, but you have led this group of people admirably, and since we got elected in 2015, I'm quite proud of the investments that we've made. I wonder if you and perhaps the heads of the different agencies could comment. Actually, and before I go, Ms. Lloyd, I'd like to congratulate you on your new role, leading an agency that does such important work for Canadians. Can you, in spite of the fear-mongering that's been going on here, can Canadians have confidence in our agencies, and can Canadians feel safe that we are, that we have the tools and continuing evolving tools to deal with these kind of terrorist threats?
Ms. Demoff, thank you for the question. I'm happy to see you as well at this committee again. You did important work here in your role as a parliamentary secretary on many of these issues. Our government has sought to increase resources, for example, to CSIS. One of the most significant investments in both technology and capacity at CSIS happened in the budget 2024 a few months ago. I think all of us should be very proud as parliamentarians and our colleagues in the other place as well for adopting Bill C-70, which gave for the first time in decades new authorities for CSIS in a digital age. So to comments about the existence of videos on a dark web, I think it's important, Ms. Demoff, for people to understand, and I hear this from the security agencies. I have never been myself on the dark web looking for these kind of videos. It's called the dark web precisely because these kind of videos don't normally come with credits and contact information at the end of it. So the idea that there's some simple way that security agencies and partners around the world are able to have access to the sickeningly thousands and millions of images of this kind of thing, that's why partnerships are so important. That's why working with the 150 other countries that Vanessa described is the best way for CSIS and their partners in the RCMP and CBSA to do this work. So they need access to the technology. They need legislative authorities, which this Parliament gave them a few months ago, which is terrific. And they need their government to support them with the funds necessary to modernize. I believe that work is being done. I'm lucky enough with this super interesting job I have to see that work up close every week and every month. And as I said in my opening comments, Ms. Demoff, when I was briefed by CSIS on July 24th, and when Deputy Commissioner Larkin and his colleagues Mark Flynn and Commissioner Duhem updated me on the 28th of July that these people were in custody, successful arrest had been made. It reminded me of the remarkable work done by these women and men in the agencies represented here, the danger of their work, and the value of working constructively with partners around the world. Because if we're not constructive and if we're reckless in releasing information, discussing origins of information, commenting on media reports of certain images and the existence of evidence that may end up forming part of a criminal prosecution, we'll increasingly be unable to get that information. We won't look like the reliable partner that we are with those agencies. I heard from the director of MI6 himself, the chief, in London, about how much he values the work that CSIS does and the information that CSIS gives MI6. I thought that was reassuring for Canadians to know that somebody as interesting in the world as the chief, he would be C in the films that we've all seen. When Sir Richard Moore told me that they are absolutely dependent on CSIS and other partners, it told me the system is working quite well.
I know my time is up, Chair. The Conservatives voted against every investment that we've made in these security agents over the last 9 years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Demoff. And thank you, Minister. Safe travels. And thank you for being here and having the forbearance to bear with us a little longer.
Mr. Chair, thank you, and thanks to colleagues, and I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks. I'll be in your province, in the great city of Nanaimo, I guess in 10 days. But thank you, colleagues, for taking time in the middle of a non-sitting week to join us, and thank you for the invitation.
And BC is the best province to come to in this. Thank you. So we'll suspend for a couple minutes. We'll bring in another witness, and if everyone wants to get a coffee, suspended. Mr. Harpreet S. Kokar, Deputy Minister from the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, joining us, as well as all the other people that we've been breaking in all morning. So welcome back, everyone. We will start a fresh round of questions. This will be 6 minutes round. We'll start with Mr. Motz, please. I'm sorry? Mr. Motz, then you?
No, myself.
You want to start?
Mr. Brock, then Ms. Lantzman, then Mr. Motz.
Okay, we'll start with you.
Okay.
Mr. Caputo.
I'm sorry, I thought that had been communicated to you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you all to the witnesses. I see that Mr. Kochar is joining us here. I hope I pronounced that correctly. My eyes aren't the best right now, so I hope I'm reading your name correctly here, sir. And to anybody on the panel here, this individual, the accused, I'm not going to mention his name, when was he first flagged?
Mr. Chair, the initial contact which we had with this person was when he submitted his application as a temporary resident visitor visa in 2017.
And he was flagged at that point as a concern?
No, it was just the first interaction which we had.
When did he first come to the attention of security or intelligence authorities as a potential, as somebody who should be flagged for someone who we would have concerns, potentially terrorist concerns about?
Mr. Chair, what I would say in that regard is that we, in a way, when we are actually doing our immigration procedure, we regularly go through the initial screening as well as the other screening through biometrics, and that's when we actually work with our security partners to see if there are any things which are any flags on that one.
So the information we have is that in December 2017, he was initially refused a visitor visa. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
And do we know why he was refused that?
I don't know that I don't have the details, but the folks who are actually the visa is rejected due to multiple reasons, whether there is incomplete documentation, there is missing information, the person who is evaluating is not satisfied with what is provided. So there are multiple reasons for that.
Do we know if he was rejected based on security reasons?
To my knowledge, that was not the case, because when he applied again on 2018 as a visitor visa, he was approved.
Okay. So, sir, are you able to confirm that to this committee in writing, that this rejection wasn't for a security reason in follow-up to this meeting?
I'll have to actually confirm those things.
That's what I mean.
In terms of that, yes.
If you don't have the answer today, if you could please just provide that in writing to this committee, just so we can be aware. So if my understanding is correct, this individual was flagged on a number of occasions, but to anybody at the table, maybe this is best answered by CSIS, when was the first time that he was flagged as a security risk?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question, Honourable Member. As per the details in the chronology and the material that's been put to the committee today, the first instance where this Canadian Security Intelligence Service became aware that this individual could pose a potential threat was in June of 2024, so June of this year.
Okay. Now, and I don't mean to be, perhaps I'm being too direct, but I'll be direct. Is that not a concern, a failure, when we think that somebody who is in a video publicly, I know that there's been a lot of discussion about whether we can discuss the contents of that video, but this person clearly was the subject matter of a depiction that was of serious concern. This person was ultimately granted citizenship. This person was on Canadian soil for 6 years. Is there not some failure that we didn't know about his activities beforehand?
Mr. Chair, again, thank you for the question. I would respectfully disagree with the premise that there was a failure in this case. As referenced earlier by our minister, there are several lines of defense. Security screening programs are one, and they do begin before people have arrived in Canada, as they come to our border, and also once they have arrived in Canada. And I would say that the third line of defense, which are national security investigations, in this case was very successful. And I can again assure the committee that as soon as CSIS had that information, we acted, we assessed, and mitigated the threat in conjunction with our security partners.
I have no doubt that CSIS acted accordingly, and from what I can see, did an excellent job. And the RCMP, obviously, we commend them for their work. Just from an outsider looking in, when I see that somebody arrived on Canadian soil in 2017 after obvious ties to ISIS, that they were given citizenship in 2023 or 2024, and then, despite those earlier ties, only came to our attention in 2024, that gives me cause for concern. And it begs the question, has anybody else slipped through the cracks in this way?
Mr. Chair, I again can assure the committee that the service takes its security screening responsibilities very seriously, and we take the time and due effort with regards to every file that is referred to the service to make assessments, which we provide to our partners, that go to decisions that can be taken based on the information that is available at the time. I also would like to assure the committee that public safety is the service's #1 priority, and that we are mindful of the potential threats that cross into our borders, as well as those exist here, and work very hard on an ongoing basis to address those threats.
Thank you, Mr. Caputo.
Thank you.
Go now to Ms. Said. Go ahead. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Gilliwan. How many individuals do you reject for entry into Canada over the course of a year, and what are the reasons of the rejection, and how does CBSA deal with bad actors who could potentially lie to us about their reasons for trying to get into Canada? So if you can explain that process.
Sure. So consistent with my prior testimony, 100% of asylum seekers are reviewed, and then for temporary residency, permanent residency, there's a selected sample sent for screening. In 2023, there were 1,000 that met the threshold of conclusive serious inadmissibility, and then there was a further amount where it was suspected. And so we flagged roughly 6,000 people through those test checks that I mentioned. And those can occur well before the person even gets to the airport. Then we have a second pass where CBSA is looking for serious criminality, misrepresentation, a whole series of threats, including national security, where we physically have people located abroad who no board people from planes. That's roughly 7,500 people back to that 2023 year. The kind of third line of defense, just from a CBSA perspective, is when people actually present to the port of entry, where border service officers inspect and interview people. And again, the broad category of people that ought not to be in the country, that's an allowed to leave situation, roughly 35,000 a year, an additional 3,500 for serious inadmissibility. And again, serious inadmissibility can include national security threats, espionage, organized crime, but those are very significant bad actors. And so those are the layers of defense. Those screens rely on the professional judgment of our employees, as well as information from domestic partners seated around the table here and international partners. And so the CBSA approach to the screen is to know who we're looking for, or the aliases, the patterns of travel and behavior. We scrutinize travel history, where you've been, and those kinds of things. We interview people, and we're basically trying to test the story put in front of us and working from a script from intelligence partners that tell us what to be watchful for.
Thank you. And security screening is repeated again at the stage of granting citizenship.
So
how that process works.
So as with this case, 100% of asylum seekers are subject to security screening. A selection of high-risk people seeking other statuses are subject to review. Having reviewed, as we did in this case, this individual in 2018 and 2021, at the citizenship stage, having already vetted twice, they weren't passed through CBSA for a check before citizenship, having been already vetted twice.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Larkin. What factors led to the RCMP being able to take such a swift action to protect Canadians and the City of Toronto in this particular case?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. In July of 2024, we received information from our partner agency, CSIS, in relation to a potential threat to Canadian security. The Greater Toronto Area INSET team, which is an integrated national security team that involves other police of jurisdiction, including the OPP, Toronto Police Service, Peel Regional Police, Durham, and York, commenced an active criminal investigation that included significant surveillance and monitoring, which ultimately on July 28th led to the charge. I'm not able to speak to specifics as this matter is before the courts, but the information provided on, we made this obviously a national priority, dedicated significant resources in partnership with other police of jurisdiction, which ultimately led to the arrest and the ongoing matter before our judicial system. Thank you.
Thank you. My next question is in regards to the Immigration Department for Mr. Kochar. Can you please explain and elaborate on the role that biometric information plays in protecting Canadian borders and serving as the foundation of identity management?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So biometrics is an important tool which we employ in terms of collecting that information so that we can actually match it through RCMP with the different database which they have. We also have the capability with the collection of that biometric information to actually ping our 5I partners too. That database is actually very valid for up to 10 years. So at the different stages, one in the journey of immigrant from the temporary resident visa to permanent resident to citizenship, that biometrics is an important tool for us. And this is important also, Mr. Chair, just to confirm one more thing that is a part of our identity management for the individual, as well as North American perimeter approach, which actually allows our partners to have a similar information.
And can you explain the role of the immigration officers who conduct initial inadmissibility assessments of permanent and temporary resident applications? So what training do these officials at IRCC receive, and what tools do they have to effectively screen those applications?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So IRCC officers are highly trained officers who have an in-depth knowledge of Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, as well as other acts like Citizenship Act and so on. Now, an important part of that is that during the initial screening at the temporary resident state, so if a person is applying overseas for a visitor visa, an initial security screening is done, along with different questions which are asked in our questionnaire. Supporting documents are seen, and any of those, if they ever actually raise a flag, we can then go to our security partners for enhanced screening. But generally, if the officer who is well trained in this, and these are Foreign Service officers posted abroad, they are satisfied with the information provided, then a temporary resident visa is actually given. For the permanent resident visa, there is a different procedure, although in the same case, the eligibility and admissibility is always the backbone of our immigration system.
Merci. Thank you, Ms. Said. On y va maintenant encore à Monsieur Fortin. Monsieur Fortin.
Now heading over to Mr. Fortin. Mr. Fortin, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Inaudible for the interpreter.
Monsieur, le son est...
Sorry, the sound went bad. On my end, everything seems to be working. Mic is Jabra. I have the right headset. It's worked itself out. We will restart your time. Thank you, Chair. I would ask Mr. Kokar if he could explain the screening process. Should I understand that there's not a security screening in all cases? The screenings only take place when an agent believes it would be useful to carry out one. Did you say this earlier?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for that question.
Mentioned was that enhanced security screening is based on the initial, and that is the one which the immigration officer may decide based on the risk indicators as well as the initial information. But all visitors, all students.
Quand il n'y a pas de risque, il n'y a pas de vérification.
So when there's no risk, there's no security screening? When you don't believe there will be a risk?
Initial screening does include our biometrics, which is a part of our security screening, as well as, Mr. Chair, the ability to actually look at the departmental databases, also to look against the risk indicators, which we have worked with CPSA and CSIS. So there is a security screening, which is called initial security screening. Only if there is a flag, we then refer it for a comprehensive security screening, which is then referred to our security partners.
Merci. Madame Lloyd.
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd. I understand from this response that there's not always an application for a more in-depth screening if there's no red flag. But if there is a red flag, CSIS carries out a more in-depth screening. I know our colleagues are asking the same questions quite frequently, but there was a video from 2015, And years went by. The individual was granted residency permits and then eventually citizenship. The video went on existing. It came to the light in France. It then was transferred to Canada. How can you explain the fact that Canadian agencies were unaware of the video until June of 2024? Thank you, Chair.
In English in order to be clear and precise. I would refer the committee to additional information in the information that's been put to the committee today about how the service undertakes that enhanced biometric security screening that my colleague Dr. Kochar mentioned. On the member's question, I'm not going to comment on allegedly leaked classified information. As I mentioned in my comments earlier this morning, information exchanges with partnerships is an important tool as it relates to our ability to combat threats globally as to ensure the safety of Canadians, but also citizens of the world. I would like to echo...
Oui, non, mais je comprends donc.
Thank you. I understand you don't want to comment on the current case as it is before the courts. But what I want to understand is, above and beyond the question of finger pointing, we need to figure out a way that would make it so that a situation as unfortunate and dangerous as this one never happens again. For that reason, I am asking what checks are carried out, and without getting into the video, hypothetically, we could go years without being aware of a serious crime committed by a person abroad. And the person who committed this crime can end up a refugee in Canada and as a Canadian citizen. This happened. This could happen again. How can this be? How could there be such serious failures of the process in Canada, and what can be done to resolve them?
I'll perhaps repeat my earlier testimony that in terms of the service's important role in security screening on this and any case that comes before us that is referred by our partners, we do our work based on the information that is available at the time. And as mentioned in the chronology and in earlier testimony today, the information that there was a potential threat posed in this case surfaced to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service in June of this year.
Merci, Madame Lloyd. Ceci dit, comment se fait-il que vous ne l'ayez su qu'en juin?
But, Ms. Lloyd, how could it be that it took until June?
I will not comment on the specifics of this case in order to protect the integrity of our operations. Thank you.
Je comprends, je m'excuse.
I'm sorry, Ms. Lloyd. I only have a few seconds left. Forget this specific case. Generally, how can it be the case that years can go by before your service becomes aware of important information? You're describing this as an exceptional circumstance. Is it? And if not, how can it take years before such important information comes to light?
Chair, what I can tell the committee is that there is an increasingly complex and intensifying global threat environment. And this does include instances where individuals are mobilizing to violent extremist activities. This is a priority for our organization, as is the safety and security of all Canadians, in this case and in any other case that comes before us.
Merci, Monsieur Fautin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
We go now to Mr. McGregor. Mr. McGregor, go ahead, please. 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think I'll send my first question to Interim Director Lloyd of the service. Again on this video, but I'm not going to get into the specifics because I understand the limitations you have in answering in a public forum. I guess my question is more on the process, and it's going to be related also to the recent changes that Parliament enacted through Bill C-70 in the complete overhaul that we did with the dataset regime that is under the CSIS Act. I guess a couple of questions to you, Interim Director Lloyd. Many Canadians are not very familiar with the dark web and the millions of images and videos that are present there. Could you just tell the committee, the sort of the magnitude of what it's like, the challenge of sifting through those images and videos in terms of finding that important data that you can then share with relevant agencies to determine if there are any security threats that have a potential of entering Canada? And also, what do recent changes in Bill C-70, notably the computational analysis of data sets, we essentially took an analog law and brought it up to speed in a digital era. What do those changes now allow the service to do in sifting through those images and videos in order to make these kinds of important determinations? Anything that because I think on behalf of Canadians, this committee is serving a very important role in, while we may not be able to ask you on the specifics of this case, I think Canadians also deserve to know the kinds of tools that the service is employing, the strategies going forward, and the lessons you've learned from this, so that these kinds of instances are not going to happen in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start, Honourable Member, by responding to your comments with regards to what I can and cannot say at committee. And so, unfortunately, I'm unable to answer in detailed specifics the capabilities, methodologies, and tradecraft that we employ in this or any other case. To do so would jeopardize the integrity of our operations and our ability to conduct our operations securely. I do thank the Honourable Member for referencing the changes to legislation that we received through Parliament under Bill C-70, which is an act countering foreign interference. And the Honourable Member is quite right. There were changes to the permissions to and authorities to the service under the Act, both with respect to our data set regime and also with regards to information sharing. And perhaps I would suggest that it is the latter piece of the change that maybe is most helpful in this instance, because the permissions that are given there are for the organization to share beyond the federal government classified information in order to increase resiliency against threats. And so the information sharing provisions that we will move forward on under those changes will allow us, in fact, to inform Canadians more about the threats that exist and to be able to equip them to be resilient with regards to those threats.
Thank you for that. Maybe I'll turn my next question to the Deputy Minister from Citizenship and Immigration. We've had some reference both in the chronology that was given to this committee 50 minutes before we start, but also in some of the conversations through questions about risk indicators and so on. And the notes in the documents that we received do state that specific risk indicators cannot be disclosed in order to protect the integrity of the immigration screening program. So that is well understood. But could you give the committee and Canadians who are listening to this some examples of, broadly speaking, what do these risk indicators, what can they include?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the risk indicators which we deploy at the initial screening and through the immigration process are very much developed with in combination with IRCC with the CBSA and CSS. There are risk indicators which will point to whether there are flags which are because of potential fraud. Are there any other aspects which we should be careful about in terms of our security partners? Ted may be able to give you a little bit more in terms of the magnitude of those risk indicators in general and not specific to this case.
We ask for 10-year residency, 10-year employment history, 10-year travel history. We compare that against the passport. We use a variety of open sources of information to test whether people lied or misrepresented themselves. Through the intelligence function, we have certain countries, certain time periods where we should be worried about associations. And so there's an in-depth review of friends, family members, associates, a bit of a spider web of who the individuals works with or spends time with. And so those would be some of the tests that are applied. to every single case. And then again, as I mentioned, the intelligence services feed a certain roster of individuals, aliases that we should be worried about. And so that screen is also applied.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. So that wraps up round one. We're running short of time, so I'm going to propose to the committee that we do a lightning round, 3 minutes per party, and many of these organizations will be returning in the next meeting, although we will have a slight change in the personnel. So, Mr. Caputo on a point of order.
Yes, I know that we are running short on time. This is our first opportunity, though, to ask questions. I would respectfully ask that we canvass the officials as to their availability to stay rather than just immediately going to our lightning round.
Do we want to do that? Do we have agreement? Mr. Gerritsen.
I thought that you just said a moment ago that the majority of them were staying.
The organizations, all of them are present in the next meeting. The individuals may not be. Miss Lloyd will be here, I believe, and I'm not sure who else. Ms. Demoff.
Chair, if they're all coming back and they've been here for 2 hours to answer questions, I think in fairness to them, to give them a half an hour, or probably once you do the round, slightly less, a half-hour break to go to the washroom and perhaps get a bite to eat is only fair. It's not like this is our only opportunity to ask questions of these departments, or these agencies, I mean.
So Mr. Brock, go ahead.
I understand and I appreciate the intervention of Ms. Damoff, but there is one witness in particular. I am the next conservative to ask questions. The RCMP is only here for the first panel. He's got other business to attend to, and I want to focus a lot of my questions to him. So I'm mindful of 3 minutes. I could probably get it complete in 3 minutes. I would prefer 5. But I just want to put that on the record that not everyone currently here will be returning on the second panel. And I'm also mindful of the fact that you gave us a 10-minute, or actually almost a 15-minute recess to allow the minister to leave and to allow us to refresh ourselves and to take a comfort break.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. We'll go ahead then with 3 minutes. We'll start with Mr. Brock for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone's attendance. My questions in the 3 minutes will be directed to you, Deputy Commissioner. So I know that we don't want to talk a lot about the video. I appreciate it from a legal perspective, why we are perhaps approaching on dangerous territory, but I'm not getting into the evidence per se or the ability of a Crown to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm taking a look at the video at face value. There is an unknown quotient here, whether the victim was alive or already dead before this particular accused chose to cut off his hands and feet. If, in fact, he were alive, it opens up the possibility to attempt murder charges, or if the actions of the accused caused the death of the victim, in essence bleeding out, then we'd be looking at murder charges under the criminal code. Or if the person were already dead and then the dismemberment took place, then we'd be looking at a Section 182 offense regarding the indignity committed to a dead body. Are these potentially some of the issues? I'm not asking for a positive confirmation, but rather an acknowledgement that what I just described to you could potentially be live issues in regards to a police investigation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. As earlier indicated, a significant amount of work has gone into this investigation in a short period of time with a significant amount of resources dedicated. I do want to highlight the excellent work of the GTA Inset and all of our police of jurisdiction. We do have a matter before the court, and of course, with such a large national security investigation, although there are charges before the judicial system, our investigation continues. And so I'm limited to what I can say, and I must refrain from commenting on specifics or ongoing investigative pieces. But what I can tell you is that we continue to actively investigate, and we continue to do the work that is required as a part of the investigation. So charges have been laid, but we have an ongoing active investigation. Thank you.
I'll read between the lines with that statement, and I thank you for that statement, that potentially there is an affirmative response to the question I put to you, although I'm not asking for any confirmation. I want to talk briefly with the time I have available. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have? 40 seconds. 40 seconds. Biometrics, is it only in relation to fingerprints, or are we now advanced in terms of taking a look at facial recognition as part of biometrics?
So, Mr. Chair, the biometrics includes the fingerprints, and I'll have to confirm whether it does do the facial recognition piece, but biometrics is certainly the information is on the fingerprints.
Would you confirm that to committee within a couple of weeks after your appearance?
We will confirm that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. We go now to Mr. Gahir. Mr. Gahir, 3 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing before the committee. My questions are for Dr. Kocher from Immigration. This essentially started with a visitor visa. An individual was granted a visitor visa. They came to Canada. They applied for asylum. I wanted to focus on the security screening process for a visitor visa. I understand that the security screening is trilateral. That's CSIS, it's CBSA, it's IRCC. Now, I'll give you an example. I have lots of cases in my constituency office where an individual has applied for a visitor visa for a family member overseas, potentially from India, let's say, and they have worked in the army or they've worked in the local police force. And that immigration process, that security screening can take years. I have cases that have been stuck in limbo for 3, 4, 5 years now, just looking at that security screening. So I guess I wanted to ask about what sorts of security screening are happening overseas. What information is requested? Are interviews conducted? And potentially with a country like India or Pakistan, of which I have a lot of constituents from, what information is requested from those local governments, and what does that cooperation look like?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So let me start by saying what I mentioned earlier. IRCC is the first line of defense where we are doing the initial security screening, which is, based on the risk indicators, we ask the questions. We also have the biometrics availability. We work with our security partners to see what kind of pinging we get from the different databases. We also look at our own databases. Have this person used a different name, alias, or different passport? So this is all a part of our common, the platform with which we begin with the temporary resident visa. Now, once there is, if there is, not once, but if there is any indication or any flag, we actually refer it for comprehensive security screening, which takes place with the CBSA and CSIS. And we, as an IRCC office, can only make an admissibility decision once the officer is satisfied after consultation with our security partners that there is a favorable return on the security flag or the advanced security or comprehensive security screening. And if it is not, then we will call it non-admissible and the person will not be allowed to enter into Canada. Now, there are, as Ted earlier explained, my colleague explained, there are different risk indicators which actually our security partners work through in terms of their association with different, governments and different regimes and different. So that part is actually worked through our security partners. And if it is not available to us or if it is inconclusive, so it takes a bit more of time before that security or admissibility is actually passed and the person is granted the visa. I don't know, Ted, if you want to add anything to that one.
I would just say military service certainly triggers a deeper dive, and then we customize the decision based on the person's role, the time period in which they served, were they a conscript or not. So again, that's the hard work of the security screening, is to do a deeper dive on the individual to ascertain their role and what behaviors they engaged in during their period of service.
So just
Thank
to
you,
follow
Mr.
up on
Gahir.
that, are investigations conducted?
Sorry, Mr. Gahir, we're out of time.
Okay, thank you.
The only organization that won't be back in the next meeting, I think, is Public Safety. So the others, you may be able to renew these questions then. We go now to on y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin. 3 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Kochar.
We got the cameras gone? Okay. So welcome to meeting number 117 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Before we begin, I'm not going to read this, we read it just a few minutes ago. Use the black headsets and keep them away from the mics. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly, I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of members. Wait until I recognize you, please, by name before speaking. For members in the room, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. Members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The committee clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your understanding in this regard. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Another item of business is that when we have people speaking online, the sound in this room is not very good, apparently, because of feedback issues. So we're recommending that when someone online is speaking, to use your headsets, and you should be able to hear them well. So pursuant to Standing Order 108, Sub 2, and the motion adopted on August 13, the committee is meeting to study the review of the foiled terrorism plot in Toronto and of the security screening process for permanent residents and citizen applications. So I want to remind members that there is currently a Section 517 publication ban in place. A Section 517 publication ban prohibits the publication of any information, evidence, or representations made at or in anticipation of a bail hearing. Any bail conditions, reasons of the bail court, and any evidence or materials relied upon at the bail hearing are prohibited from disclosure. I asked the House of Commons Legal Counsel to give us some advice on this as well. And I can't find a note, but apparently if documents that we receive in the meeting, during the meeting, and we exchange amongst ourselves during the meeting are covered by privilege. Here we go. Well, this ban has no impact on proceedings based on the privilege of freedom of speech. Nonetheless, members should, out of respect for the judiciary, exercise great caution and do not refer to any of the facts relating to the bail hearing for the individuals involved in this case. Further, parliamentary privilege does not provide protection for statements that are made outside of the official parliamentary proceedings. Members should be mindful of this when making any comments publicly to the media or when using social media. We also note the application of the Sub Judice Convention, which suggests that members should refrain from discussing matters that are currently before the courts. Members should exercise caution and not refer unduly or unnecessarily to matters that are before the courts. Anyway, I think we're all kind of aware of this, but it never hurts to be more aware. So I'd like now to welcome the witnesses. From the Canadian Border Services Agency, we have Aaron McCrory, Vice President, Intelligence and Enforcement. With Canadian Security Intelligence Service, we have Vanessa Lloyd, Interim Director. From the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, we have Pemi Gill, Assistant Deputy Minister, and Aisha Zafar, Assistant Deputy Minister of Migration Integrity. And with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Senator Gates Flaherty, Director General, Canadian Criminal Real-Time Identification Services. So we'll go straight away into questions. I propose also to break this at halfway through, so we have like a 5-minute break, and we will start a new round of questions after that. So we'll start with the 6-minute round. We'll start with Ms. Lansman.
Thanks for joining us. I'm gonna go back to what we were talking about when the minister was here. And while we appreciate the work and speed at which agencies acted when they had the information, I can understand why people would say that that's how the system works. What we haven't got to the bottom of here today is our concern about why you didn't have the information after this individual had been in this country for 6 years. And from the chronology that you provided this committee right before it started, had 6 different incidents of security checks. I'm going to ask you, whether it's Mr. McCrory or Ms. Lloyd, how can Canadians be sure that there are the proper checks in the system to make sure that this didn't happen before, that there aren't terrorists in our midst, and that this won't happen again? You can appreciate that Canadians want the answer to that question.
Mr. Chair, I can start, and then Vanessa, if you want to join in. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I'd like to describe is, in fact, I think we have a very robust system in place when it comes to security screening. You've heard a little bit in the previous session. It starts with the assessment that is done by our colleagues in the IRCC, and then based on risk indicators, comprehensive files are referred to the CBSA and CSIS to do comprehensive security screening. And we can describe in more detail what is entailed in that, but I'd say from a CBSA point of view, it's about understanding the person who's in front of us, reviewing the information that we have, understanding their travel history, their work history, where they're coming from, and then doing in-depth analysis both in terms of open source research, but also running names and information aliases against a range of our intelligence and enforcement databases. If necessary, then we also dig into further getting information from domestic as well as international partners. And then we provide a recommendation to our IRCC in terms of, but sorry.
Yeah, that has all been covered. I just want you to appreciate that that this individual who is allegedly on an ISIS video from 2015 that was publicly available has been in this country for 6 years before the RCMP thwarted a terrorist plot that would have killed people in the GTA, somewhere in Toronto, presumably, after 6 security checks. You can appreciate why Canadians are concerned, can't you?
So again, our outcome, the goal that we're focused on is ensuring the protection of Canada and Canadians. And so when we make our decisions, when we do our analysis, it's based on the information that we have available at any given moment in time.
I think this is the most robust process that could have happened in this case. You're telling Canadians that?
I'm telling Canadians that we have a robust system in place, but as the Minister indicated as well earlier, we are asking ourselves, do improvements need to be made? So we are conducting.
So there wasn't a failure in this?
I would go back to the point is that we've made the best decisions we can at those moments in time with the information that was available.
So Canadians watching this see that, again, 6 security checks, 6 years of this individual who is publicly on an ISIS videotape, who is now behind bars or being held on very serious terrorism charges. You think the system, you really believe that the system worked as it should? As the minister, he dismissed anything that was wrong with the system here today in his testimony. You really think that that's how the system should work here? You're really telling Canadians who are watching at home that the system is robust and everything worked as it should in this case?
What I'm telling Canadians is we're asking ourselves, can there be improvements made to the system? We're taking a very hard look at that. We're doing that in collaboration with our partners in CSIS, in the IRCC. We're going to do a representative sample of cases that have had positive assessments in the past and ask ourselves, have we missed anything? Are there any systemic issues, any gaps in our processes?
Anything. There's been 6 incidents of security checks here. Of course you've missed something. These guys were just arrested. A father-son duo were just arrested in a hotel room 10 minutes from the riding that I represent and within 40 minutes of the riding that committee members here represent. Of course you've missed something. Has there been any consequences for anybody who has been involved in any of these checks?
There's nothing to indicate at this moment in time that we had information available to us when we made those decisions that would...
That's a problem?
I'm saying we're asking ourselves if we need to review some of our processes and systems.
I appreciate that you're asking yourself these questions, but don't you think it's a problem that you didn't know that this guy was awarded a visa here 6 years ago after being in an ISIS video from 2015 that is publicly available and was arrested with his son days before committing a terrorist attack?
I'm apologizing, and I just have to repeat that, in fact, we made the best decisions that we could at that moment in time based on the information that we had. I think we have robust systems in place, but we are asking ourselves, can we do more? And we're looking backwards to see if, in fact, we need to do more.
I don't think there's a single Canadian watching today that would agree that you have robust systems in place if this is what happened. I don't think there's a single Canadian today watching saying, you know what, the system worked exactly as it should. What happened? Where were the failures? Why did this government fail?
I'm not sure there are any failures. Again, we are going to do a respective view and to see if there's more, if we missed anything, and if there is, we will make corrections. We have 183 staff at CBSA that every day are conducting security screening. About 206,000 per year we get coming our way, and we issued about I want to say 130 decisions last year. So.
Guy who slipped through the cracks. Can you assure Canadians that there hasn't been any more, that there aren't terrorists in our midst, that this won't happen in the future? I appreciate that you think that this is a robust system that worked exactly as it should, but I think people watching this would disagree with you.
What I would assure Canadians is that we have multiple lines of defense in place. So if we don't capture them at the stage of security screening, we also look at people coming to the country. And as you heard from earlier testimony, about 7,500 people were no-boarded prior to even departing for Canada. About, I want to say about 37,000 people were turned away from Canada upon entry. And then we have an additional line of defense in terms of our inland investigations. So last year we launched 88,000 inland investigations based on concerns about inadmissibility. When we find inadmissibility, we take those cases to the Immigration Refugee Board, who's a decision maker. Last year we removed 15,000 people, of which about 700-800 were serious inadmissibilities. So there's multiple lines of defense that are in place. We don't rely on a single point of failure. We have multiple lines of defense, and we're asking ourselves, do improvements need to be made? And that's, I think, a powerful message for Canadians is we do want to know if improvements can be made, and if there can be, we will make improvements.
Thank you, Ms. Lantzman. We go now to Mr. Gahir. Mr. Gahir, go ahead, 6 minutes, please.
Great, thank you, Chair. So I wanted to touch on the line of questioning that Ms. Lantzman was asking. We in Canada obviously have tens and hundreds of thousands of people that seek to get a visitor visa to come to Canada, and their security screening processes to make sure that the wrong individuals don't get access to Canada. Obviously, in this case, someone did arrive in Canada and then filed an asylum claim. Is it theoretically even possible to search every single video or to conduct a global facial recognition search on every video for the individuals that are applying for visitor visas to Canada? And do we even have the resources to scour the dark web for every single individual that applies for a visitor visa to Canada? Is that even possible, theoretically?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I can start off by talking about how we initially screen temporary resident applicants, so those coming in to visit Canada. Every application for an individual who wants to come to Canada as a visitor is screened by the IRCC with that initial security screening. And so we look at biometrics. Biometrics helps us not only to identify whether or not there's any criminality that is known, but it also helps us to, in terms of identity management. This is the first time that we're seeing an individual, and we anchor that identity for the individual throughout the entire process. Our officers are highly trained in different risk indicators. These risk indicators are created collaboratively with our partners at the CBSA and at CSIS. Those risk indicators are clues for the officers when they're going through an application on where there might be some type of elevated risk or where there might be an opening
so
to...
Just to interrupt, once we've reached that elevated level of risk, for that pool of people, is it possible then to conduct a dark web search or a facial recognition search for all the content on the internet in the world for those individuals? I don't think that's theoretically even possible, no?
My colleagues at CBSA or CSIS who would then at that point conduct a comprehensive security screening if we referred the application. Vanessa, did you want to?
Certainly. Perhaps I can jump in, Mr. Chair. So I'll refer to the members of the committee to the information put before them in terms of the range of other tools that are available in each and every case. And so upon referral, where we do have indications of a possible national security concern, a risk indicator, doesn't mean that there is information present at that time. We can apply a range of tools. And you'll see in the material that we put to the committee that can include, as we discussed this morning, checks with international partners, reviews of open sources and other tools. I will refrain from getting into the specifics of our capabilities as it relates to the members' specific question in terms of technical capabilities and methodologies. But what I can say in answer to part of the concern I'm hearing from the committee is that while I said this morning there is an increasing and intensifying risk as it relates to violent extremism, the members should be assured, and Canadians should be assured, that there is a very small number of people who are present in Canada who are willing to mobilize to violence.
So I still want to focus on the question regarding scouring the dark web. Should our law enforcement be scouring the dark web when it comes to conducting routine security screens, assessments?
I would say from a CBSA point of view, and Ted Gallivan alluded to this earlier, we are asking ourselves, do we need to do more in that particular space? So as part of the review, we're asking ourselves, what's the feasibility of that? What would it take from a technology point of view? And what would be the usability of the information that we'd get from that and the feasibility of us finding it? It is a daunting challenge, but we are asking ourselves that question.
Okay. Chair, how much time do I have left?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. So I wanted to ask a question about the difference between an individual that has gotten a visitor visa, that lands in Canada, let's say at Pearson Airport, which is in my riding, and that files for asylum at that airport, which is an inland claim, versus an individual that makes a claim prior to entering to Canada. Because can anyone on the panel speak to the different legal protections that are afforded to those two individuals, or maybe how different the processes are for those two streams?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I can say is that, as you mentioned, every individual who is in Canada who claims asylum is subject to 100% security screening by our partners at the CBSA and CSIS. So that comprehensive security screening is conducted on every asylum claimant in Canada. With individuals who are looking to seek asylum, coming into Canada from outside, they are assessed differently. I don't have all of the details, as I'm more on the migration integrity side. They are assessed to determine whether or not they could become permanent residents in Canada, and then they would go through, if it's approved, a permanent resident screening process.
Could we have a submission to the committee, I don't know if that's possible, of the difference in the security screening procedures for an overseas application that's seeking asylum versus an inland application seeking asylum?
We can certainly look into that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gahir. On y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin.
Now to Mr. Fortin. Mr. Fortin, go ahead, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question will be for Mr. McCrory. In his testimony, Mr. McCrory told us that the system is working well as it exists and that there was no failure. So I understand that, in quotes, it's normal or common for individuals like these two to obtain the right to be in Canada, obtain Canadian citizenship and all of that. I find that concerning. I sincerely believed, and I don't think I was the only one, I sincerely believed that there had been major mistakes, gaps in the system, but we're being told that there weren't. I thought there was a problem with funding. We're told it's not the case. I'd like to know, in Mr. McCrory's opinion, is this normal? What should we expect in Canada? How many individuals does he think there are like these two who are preparing terrorist attacks?
Merci pour le...
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
I want to reiterate that, in fact, we are concerned that these two individuals got through. And that is why, in fact, we are launching a collaborative review of our processes with our partners in the IRCC and CSIS to understand what happened and what, if anything, we could do differently. What I would say is at the moment in time that the security screening partners reviewed these files, we made decisions based on a very robust process based on the best information we had available at that time. When new information becomes available, for example, when somebody is in the country, there are different steps that we take, and I won't comment on what the CSIS and our CMP may do in the criminal world, but from from a CBSA point of view, if we have information regarding somebody's inadmissibility in the country, we will launch an inland investigation. As I noted, we're doing about 8,000 of those this year. Those inland investigations will assess should this person be in the country. If not, we take that file, that evidence, to the Immigration and Refugee Board, who will make a decision about whether or not that person should be removed from the country.
Monsieur McCrory.
Mr. McCrory, I understand that once individuals are here, there are different procedures that are in place. But is there not a way to prevent them from coming here? Because if we bring people in who are terrorists, who have intentions to perpetrate terrorist attacks, in my view, I thought those individuals didn't even come to Canada. Now if we're being told that we let them in and once they're here, investigations, more robust investigations are done. Well, I find that concerning, don't you?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
What I'm trying to describe, in fact, is the multiple layers of the defense that are in place. And I think the member's question is absolutely right in terms of our first objective is to push the border out as far as possible. And that's, in fact, why we have a security screening process in place that starts with our colleagues in the IRCC, that results in comprehensive security screening being done by CSIS and the CBSA. So in 2023, we did 74,000 reviews. We had 74,000 files come our way, of which we closed 38,000 in terms of people seeking to come to the country. That's the first line of defense. First IRCC, then our security review, comprehensive security review. If somebody is on a plane or in a flight manifest on their way to the country, CBSA has additional defenses or tools that we bring to bear, other lines of defense. So we have our National Targeting Center that reviews all passenger manifests for people seeking to come to the country, and we have international liaison officers who are working overseas. They work with airlines and with local authorities to deny boarding to those people who we deem to be inadmissible, about 7,500 of them in 2023. Next line of defense is at the port of entry. We have highly trained and experienced Border Services officers.
Mr. McCrory, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't want to be impolite, but I only have 6 minutes to ask questions. I understand from your answer, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you've done everything you could do with the tools you had, you and your colleagues. But you also added earlier...
We will improve it. Avez-vous des suggestions?
Do you have suggestions? What can be done? I understand the 38,000 cases, but what can be done to improve the screening process to prevent this from happening again, in your opinion?
It's a great question. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. It is a great question. We're asking ourselves this right now. I don't have any immediate views in terms of what changes, if any, that we need to make, but I am working with my colleagues who are at the table with me today so that we can understand what happened and, again, if necessary, make any changes that we need to. The system is always going to be...
Clearly, there are other states, Mr. McCrory, with all due respect, there are other states that act and react more quickly than we do. We've seen that we were informed by a foreign country about this individual, the crimes that had been committed elsewhere. So there are other states that manage, and with all due respect, I think everyone is competent and serious in your services, but there are people who obtain better results. So you have certain expertise in this area. Do you not have an idea, before conducting studies that will take 2 or 3 years, do we not have an idea of what we could do this week, now, to improve our screening system to prevent similar cases?
First of all, I want to assure the member that this is not going to be a review that's going to take a couple of years. The minister is very clear in his direction to us that he's looking for results and information as soon as possible. So we'll be in the coming months coming back to the minister with our recommendations and our understanding of what happened. I think the challenge that we're always going to be facing is we make decisions based on the information that was available at a given moment at a time. Can we do a better job of collectively gathering some of that information? I don't know. We need to determine that. But if we don't have information, we can't make a contrary decision about somebody. That's the fundamental issue. And I'll just say, for example, we've talked about the video. To CBSA's knowledge, and it's only to CBSA's knowledge, the one version that we've been able to identify has only been available for 2 years. That's when that information was available globally and was only available to us in the last couple of weeks. We can only use the information that we have to make decisions.
Merci, Monsieur. Merci.
Thank you.
Mr. McGregor, please, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think, the witnesses would probably agree with me that concerns with individuals who are attempting to come to Canada is not just with the potential of they themselves committing an act of terror or some kind of injustice on Canadian soil, but also the potential of some whose words may inspire or incite violence here in Canada. And, I do want to note that this can happen with individuals regardless of their political ideology or their religious background. We can see that covering the entire spectrum. I've been on this committee long enough to have seen that. But I will point out one example that did make the news recently, and this is just a few weeks old. It's concerning the case of Mr. Mohammed Hoblos, who was scheduled to come to British Columbia to speak at Thompson Rivers University earlier this month. He has been registered in the European Union on the Schengen information system. So he's been barred from entering Germany, Norway, and the Netherlands. And I believe he was also detained and deported from Switzerland. So I just want to use his as an example because there may be others. And I wanted to point out those countries because, of course, Germany, Norway, Netherlands, and Switzerland are strong Western democracies. They share the same values as Canada does, and I'm sure have very similar outlooks as the Canadian government. So I guess in comparison with other countries which are very much aligned with Canada's approach on the world stage and share our values, what can we learn from other countries which may have decided to bar certain individuals? And are there instances where those individuals, other instances where those individuals have been admitted to Canada? I'd just like to hear from some of the people who are with us today, your views on how Canada judges that information and why at times we may find ourselves at odds with some of our closest allies and partners who share our strong democratic values.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. In terms of when an individual is inadmissible to Canada, it's based on the legislation. So the Immigration Refugee Protection Act clearly outlines the reasons why an individual would be inadmissible. Using the example that you provided, you mentioned something similar to hate speech, Mr. Chair. So under the security inadmissibility in IRPA, there are various reasons why an individual could be inadmissible. Those include things like engaging in terrorism, being a danger to the security of Canada. Our officers must be able to meet the threshold of a reasonable grounds to believe that an individual is inadmissible based on the requirements of the legislation. When it comes to what information other countries have available to them, that is relevant to their own inadmissibility requirements in those countries, which may be different than our legislation. However, we do have opportunity to review that if an individual has been convicted outside of Canada of an offence that if in Canada would constitute an indictable offence under an Act of Parliament or two offences not arising out of a single occurrence, then that person would be deemed inadmissible. So our officers would then work with our national security and law enforcement partners as well as our council to ensure that we could meet the reasonable grounds to believe that that is an equivalent offence in Canada and therefore deem them inadmissible.
Thank you for that answer. And perhaps my next question would be to CSIS. There's not much Canada can do with individuals who become radicalized abroad. I mean, if we become aware of it, there's something we can do in preventing them from coming to Canada. But of course, gathering that kind of intelligence can sometimes be a very difficult task. I was wondering, are you able to speak to what kind of de-radicalization efforts the government of Canada is doing here on Canadian soil, so that we can prevent our own permanent residents who are here already, our own citizens, from following a pretty dark path and potentially committing a crime. Can you speak to any of the efforts or the kinds of resources that are being put into that kind of work?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Apologies, member, that is in fact an area that is outside of my expertise, and I'm unable to give you that information.
Do any of the witnesses have anything they can add on that? Okay, let's see. I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair, for the next questioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We'll start our second round of questions with Mr. Motz. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. One of the things that I've sat through the first 2 hours this morning and I listened carefully, and I'm still concerned as Canadians are, is, how did this happen? And the confidence they need to ensure that it doesn't keep happening. We haven't had that yet today. And I appreciate the fact that our national security apparatus acted responsibly and efficiently to thwart the attack, and that's kudos to them. However, there was a failure that occurred. We need to ensure that that failure doesn't keep happening. Now, Mr. McCormick, CBSA has a critical role and responsibility in the process to protect Canadian citizens from those coming into Canada with dangerous or divisive ideologies, and who pose a threat to our national security and public safety, and to not allow them entry. And you have, you've talked about multiple ways that you do that. Now, what's interesting that I found is I go through the timeline that we were given just before the meeting today about the various times that the accused in this matter, senior, was refused as a non-genuine, visitor. He then received a temporary resident visa. He was refused again, or not refused. He was given it. He was then assessed and found that a risk indicator, and that happened over and over and over again. These risk indicators. That's when CBSA is supposed to step in and take over. Now, what checks did you actually conduct to make that happen? Do you have access to the database that Mr. My NDP colleague talks about, the Shagan database? Did you run this individual through the FBI database? What actually are you through the Homeland Security database? Did you run them through anything that would give rise? Obviously, someone who is in an office who's interviewing this individual had concerns. They identified a risk. That same risk appeared again months later. It again appeared again years later. Yet this person was able to get temporary status, permanent status, and then become a Canadian citizen, all while these risks were being presented. How can we sit here today and ensure the Canadian public that we know that there's a problem, but we don't know, obviously this timeline even identifies the problem, and yet he was still able to be here. And I'm actually quite concerned about what that actually means. You also indicated that you mentioned before in testimony previously that CBSA has a role to play in removing people ordered removed from this country. Of those people that were ordered removed, how many actually remain at large? Do you know the answer to that?
Well, I think of the ones that were removed, they were removed. There's about
There's thousands that are ordered removed.
Right.
Some of them are ordered removed based on their risk to Canada.
I apologize. I don't have, through you, Mr. Chair, I apologize. I don't have our kind of removal stats immediately at hand, but I think you're absolutely right in the sense that last year we actually did remove 15,000 people, but there are, for example, about, in public reported data, it's about 30,000 people who are we're trying to track down, for example.
Right. And And many of those you can't find, right?
Correct.
So it's reasonable to presume, based on how this individual gained access to this country and received citizenship, that some of those also have got into this country, illegitimately. Now, one of the concerns that I wonder about is, as you navigate, and Miss the lady from Miss Safar from immigration as well. You guys have a joint role to play, and really, you guys do the interviews, and you guys are the first matter of defense before it gets into CSIS if there's an issue. What do you do, and how do you check to make sure that obviously people lie to you all the time? And I'm sure is that what happened here? And what steps are being taken by both CBSA and immigration and refugees to make sure that you can see through the lies that obviously this person told? Because people come to Canada for legitimate reasons and for illegitimate reasons, for nefarious reasons. So what are you doing to ensure that those who lie to you are caught and not allowed in?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I would like to start by saying the vast majority of those individuals who visit Canada, of which we had over 7 million applications we processed last year, the vast majority of them are truthful, genuine visitors to Canada. We at the IRCC are responsible to determine not only admissibility, but also eligibility. So I would like to clarify the two, Mr. Chair. The eligibility is really around, are you eligible under the conditions set out in the Act? So are you coming to be what you say you're coming to be? If you're applying as a visitor, do you intend to stay temporarily?
So with that in mind, Mr. Motz, you're done. I'm just giving her time to answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the eligibility would include whether or not you are a genuine visitor. So that's separate from the admissibility when we would start to screen where we do the security screening and then perhaps refer to our partners for a comprehensive security screening. Our applications set out a number of different questions where we do rely on the information that's provided by the applicants. However, the applications ask for a number of different details for the individuals to provide, and those details are then assessed against the risk indicator packages, which again are clues to the officer where we might need to do a little bit more of a comprehensive digging. We also submit biometrics, not only to the RCMP, but we have information sharing agreements with our Five Eyes partners, so we are able to check with them if there is any known derogatory information on the individual who is applying to enter Canada. The risk indicators as well, I would like to point that the risk indicators are based on the serious inadmissibilities in the legislation. So it's not only on security grounds, which would include espionage, terrorism, danger to Canada. It could be for human rights or international violation, human rights or international rights violations. It could be for serious organized crime as well. So all of those different indicators are part of our risk indicator packages. And my colleague at the CBSA.
Thank you. I'm going to have to cut you off there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very quickly.
It's those risk indicators that are developed by CBSA and CSIS and that we provide training to IRCC officers on that tell it this is a file that you should look at. It's not a definitive statement there is a risk. It is a question. It prompts the question that leads to the comprehensive security screening that we do in partnership, not instead of, but we do in partnership with organizations like CSIS.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. We go now to Ms. Zahid. Go ahead. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is to Ms. Zafar or Ms. Gill, whoever so can answer. I know that all TRV applications, all permanent resident, temporary foreign workers, students are screened, and you have a process at IRCC. What collaboration and at what stage do you do with the agencies like CSIS, CBSA and RCMP? Are all the applications referred to these agencies, or it is like a portion of the applications if there are any concerns from your initial stage? So, and if you can also provide some details like last year, how many cases you referred to them?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So absolutely, all temporary resident applicants to Canada, so that includes visitors, those coming on student permits and work permits, are screened by IRCC in that initial stage for security and other reasons. We will look at the application. The officers have to be fully convinced that the individual is not inadmissible to Canada. So there may be some back and forth with the individual collecting further information. As it was mentioned earlier, our officers can also interview the individual to collect the information. If there are any concerns that remain outstanding or risk indicators, our officers will then refer that for a more comprehensive security screening to the CBSA and CSIS. When a recommendation is returned from the CBSA, our officer will take into consideration that recommendation. We also are subject to the rules of procedural fairness. So if an officer with a non-favorable recommendation from our security screening partners has further questions, they will provide a procedural fairness letter or some opportunity for the applicant to address those concerns in order to fully satisfy the officer that the individual is not inadmissible to Canada before rendering a final decision. My colleagues at the CBSA or CSIS may wish to talk more about the comprehensive security screening process.
Would you like to add something to that?
What I would add in terms of when the file comes to us, we do, as suggested, we do, as part of our comprehensive security process, we, in addition to kind of understanding who the applicant is and their travel history, their work history, who they are, and does their story make sense, we review their name against all of our internal intelligence and enforcement databases. We also have access, thinking of some previous questions, we also have information and sharing agreements with our Five Eye partners and are able to make requests for information to partners around the world in order to gather information about people. Some of the systems, and I can't talk about the specific systems we have, again, because we don't want to give those adversaries information about what we do and how we do it, but I can assure members of the committee that we do have access to information from international partners.
My next question is that in regards to the citizenship, like, can you explain to this committee more about the process of revocation and the thresholds that must be met to, in case if you have to revoke citizenship for anyone?
Thank you for the question. There is, under the Citizenship Act of Canada, provisions that allow for the revocation of someone who has been granted citizenship. And under that, the Minister of IRCC may seek a declaration from the federal court that the person obtained citizenship by false representation or fraud or knowingly concealing material circumstances. So the process for that is such that IRCC does an initial assessment as to whether or not there is sufficient evidence and information to proceed with starting the revocation process. The client is notified, the individual is notified that there is some information and we're assessing. They're given 30 days from a procedural fairness perspective to provide any additional information they'd like to do so, at which time the IRCC, on behalf of the minister, advises the client that we are pursuing and moving forward with a revocation procedure. Depending on the circumstances under which of those three areas or the combination, the false representation or fraud or knowingly concealing material circumstances, we would then proceed with a submission to the federal court, who would be the decision maker in terms of the revocation, although the client always has the choice to request that the Minister of IRCC be the decision maker.
Do you have time? 20 seconds. I'll give. Thank you.
Thank you. On y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin.
Now, Mr. Fortin, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question will be to the representatives of the Department of Immigration. Ms. Zafar, we know that the son who arrived came from the United States, whereas the father, we don't know where he came from. He came in 2018 at Lester B. Pearson. Do you know where he was coming from?
Merci pour la question, Mr.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
At this time, due to the ongoing criminal proceedings, I am unable to provide any further details on the father.
OK. Est-ce que quelqu'un d'autre parmi les témoins?
Okay, could another one of the witnesses, does another witness know where the father came from and is able to tell me?
Personne ne sait.
No one knows? I'll get back to the Sun, Ms. Zafar.
Point of order.
Mr. Garrison on point of order.
Just to clarify, it was said that no one knows, but can we just understand if no one knows or if no one can provide the information? Because I think it's very important.
C'est impossible de savoir. Mais je ne veux pas perdre mon temps. Vous avez arrêté mon temps?
Have you stopped my time, Mr. Chair?
Time. Could we just clarify that question?
Member for the clarification, and it is correct to say that, as Ms. Zafar mentioned, we are unable to comment on that detail due to the ongoing proceedings.
Very well, thank you. Allez-y encore, Monsieur Fortin.
Go ahead, Mr. Fortin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll continue with Ms. Zafar. In the case of the son, it's indicated in the chronology that he came from the United States. He was born in Egypt, Egyptian citizenship, but he came from the United States. He entered under a refugee claim in February 2020. Why did he not return to the United States under the Safe Third Country Agreement?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
At a port of entry, which is managed by CBSA, he made an inland claim. I can't speak about his details in particular, but if somebody arrives at a land port of entry and makes an inland immigration or refugee claim, we assess them against the Safe Third Country Agreement, the SDCA. And there are a number of exemptions that apply to the SDCA, including that if you have an anchor family member here, so if somebody...
What is the exception that was involved in his case? Because in principle, he should have been returned automatically. So what exception applied here for the son?
I can't talk about this specific case, but what I can say that if you have family members in the country, that is one of the exemptions that are at play with the SDCA.
Even if the family member is a terrorist?
The SDCA says if you have an anchor, for example, if you have a family member who's in the country, you're exempt from the SDCA.
Merci, Monsieur.
Yes, but this person... Thank you. Sorry.
See. Mr. McGregor, please, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This committee has been told several times today that when actionable intelligence became available, all of the Canadian security agencies took action. And we can see from the timeline that it was in June of 2024 that CSIS became aware of the potential national security threat posed by the subject, who is an Egyptian national. I guess, there have been a number of questions today about, how we gather intelligence and how it's acted upon and how it's shared. And I know specifics can't be shared, but when it comes to an organization like ISIS, whose main theater of operations is in parts of the Middle East, which have for at least a decade or more suffered through war and all kinds of strife, I'm just wondering if CSIS could just inform the committee and maybe Canadians generally just what the challenges are in gathering intelligence in areas like that, just the kinds of challenges, whether it's from human-sourced intelligence, open-source intelligence, when you are operating in a theater that has experienced war for so long and may have crumbling infrastructure, little to no government records. Can you just talk a little bit about the challenges of what it's like to operate in that kind of an environment?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question, Honourable Member. I'm unable to go into the details of our specific operational activities either in Canada or abroad. What I can tell you is that the member is correct in that conflicts that are occurring abroad can have the potential to cross into our borders, and that can be from a range of threats, whether it be ideologically motivated, politically motivated, or religiously motivated. And I would again like to reassure the committee that, as stated earlier in our testimony, CSIS and our partner national security agencies have the resources and capabilities to address all threats as soon as we become aware of them, regardless of their provenance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We'll go now to Mr. Motz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go back to my previous line of questioning about the honesty or lack thereof of the senior suspect in this particular conversation. Do you believe it's likely in this case that he misrepresented himself on the files, and do you believe he lied? And I'll ask both Mr. Cormier and Mr. Zafar.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Due to the ongoing criminal proceedings, I cannot provide any further details on.
Well, that's not a question about the ongoing investigation. This is a question about his immigration status and how he got here. So obviously he came in under false pretense. I mean, if what you're telling Canadians is that the systems that you have in place work, and they work fine, then you would have been able to identify, some affiliation somewhere. And because you didn't, that would, give me rise to believe that either, the checks weren't done appropriately or properly, or somebody misrepresented themselves, and which is not new to either one of you and your departments. And I'm just wondering whether, if that's the case. And Mr. Cormier or Mick Cormier, I would ask you that same question.
The question, Mr. Chair, and I'm under the same restrictions in terms of what I can comment about in these particular cases.
Well, we can draw conclusions based on both of your, what you can and can't say, and I appreciate that. Ms. Zafar, you had mentioned something, and I think, Mr. McCurry, you did the same thing about you follow the requirements of the legislation. For admissibility, admittance, etc. Do you not think that Canadians have a right to believe and a right to expect that we must always err on the side of caution, that we must always be on the side of national security and public safety when we allow individuals in that we may not have all the answers to?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Our officers make every effort to satisfy themselves that an individual is not inadmissible to Canada. Working with our partners, they will do a thorough review based on the information that is available to them and to our partners at the time to make that determination. My colleague might have something that he wants to add from the CBSA.
I would, again, just echo the point in which that our staff undertake these thorough reviews. The criticism that we get as an agency is not that we're not doing thorough reviews. Typically, the criticism is we're taking too long because we take the time necessary to do the most thorough review that we can based on the best available information at any moment in time. And it's based on that information that we provide a recommendation to our colleagues in IRCC.
So as you look at the current structure we have in place now to ensure that individuals do not enter the country in the manner in which this individual did, is there legislative things that we need to look at that need to be fixed? Is there something, some ideology, some position of this current government on lax immigration standards that impact this, in your opinions? Mr. McCorry?
What I would say, and again, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I would say again is that is one of the reasons we are doing this review, to understand what happened in this particular case. Are there systemic issues? What solutions are required? They may be procedural fixes on our part. They may be allocation of resources. It may be, as I've suggested for CBSA, we need to do more on the dark web. And it may be legislative or regulatory changes. It's premature for me to speculate as to what they are, but that's certainly on our agenda in terms of what we need to look at.
Ms. Lanceman asked you a question earlier about, and I believe you answered affirmatively. I'm sure everybody, as witnesses today, understand what Canadians expect. Like, you want them, you understand their concern. I take it. Is that a yes?
Yes.
So then it's obvious then that they need answers, and not just and not just for this committee's sake, but for the sake of our national security and public safety moving forward. Because if one individual got in this way, I'll guarantee you that there are others here already, and we already know that based on 700 IRGC individuals who are already in this country. How they got here, it begs another question: how did we let those people in, who already have affiliations to an organization that's a terrorist organization? So when you do this deep dive as to where the gaps were, I think you need to go beyond this case and look at all cases for both immigration and the CBSA on how we can fix this broken system, because it is broken.
In fact, and what we want to do, to your point, we want to make sure that we do the level of analysis and the level of thinking about this that Canadians expect of us. So I don't want to give you an off-the-cuff answer in terms of what we need to do, and looking at the system as a whole. And it's not just looking at these two cases. As the Minister and Mr. Gallivan indicated, we'll be looking at a representative sample of all the cases that we've processed over a period of time to understand if there's any gaps there, and again, what improvements, if any, we need to make.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. We go now to Mr. Moff. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question with regard to the dark web. Several times today, the Conservative Party has talked about videos being readily available, publicly available, and I recognize you can't talk about information in this case. But there was research that was done that says key characteristics, and I'm quoting, key characteristics of the dark web include the inability to search or list them through legal platforms, passwords to gain entry when accessible, and hidden identities of users, network traffic, IP addresses, and data exchange through them. While the dark web was originally built for military communication and advocating freedom of speech, it has also provided technology enablement and power to adversaries to masquerade heinous activities. So I'm not being flippant here at all, but perhaps, Ms. Lloyd, this could be directed to you. How do you access the dark web?
Mr. Chair, Thank you for the question. Member, I'm not able to answer that question without revealing the details of our operational tradecraft methodologies and capabilities.
Okay. As an individual, is it easy for me to Google darkweb.com and be able to access information that's on there? And I'm not trying to be flippant, but it has been portrayed here today that it's easy to access. You can't tell us how to access it because it's in the national security interest not to share that information. So is it easy for me to access the dark web?
Mr. Chair, Honourable Member, I think what I can say is that we've spoken a bit this morning about the complexities of living in a digital age, and that would be reflected in some of the conversation we've had today about the challenges of being able to access information at the time that information is perhaps needed with regards to decisions that have to be made or files that need to be reviewed.
Thank you. The other question I had is it was alleged that Canada didn't do as well as other countries in terms of security checks on these individuals. However, the minister, when he appeared, talked about an exchange he had with the UK and how grateful the UK was about the information that was provided by Canada. I think it would be fair to say that the sharing of information actually allows us to broaden the net to make Canada safer. So it's not necessarily that one country is doing better than another. It's that we have a network, particularly the Five Eyes, but other networks where we can share information. And it's not that Canada's doing a bad job. It's that we have a network to make Canada actually safer. It's perhaps I'll direct that to CBSA.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. As a key element of our security screening program is our ability to gather, first and foremost, we look at our own data sources, but we also do rely on partners both domestically as well as internationally, and especially in the Five Eyes, but not just exclusively. So it is a two-way street, and we share information with them, and they share information with us, and it is a tremendous, there's a great deal of utility in that in terms of how we do our work.
And that sharing is ongoing too. It's something that's happening all the time between the security agencies, correct?
That is correct.
And I think it was just said that our system is broken. I would actually argue that it's not broken. And what happened in this particular case actually shows that it's not broken, that the work that all of your agencies do, and I commend all of you, actually worked. And as a result, Canadians are safer because of that. And I think it's important not to be fear-mongering here and making Canadians start to fear their neighbors, which is the sense that I'm getting from the questions. I think it's important that Canadians know that the agencies that we entrust with our national security are actually doing the work that we entrust with them and are doing it well and keeping us safe. So, Chair, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moff. So that wraps up round two. I'm going to suggest to the committee if we want to take a 5-minute break and start again after the break with another round one. Is the committee okay with that? So let's make it 5 minutes, not 10 or 15, okay? Suspended. So we'll start a new round of questions with a 6-minute round with Mr. Brock. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start with refuting what I believe to be a false narrative at this committee. And I've listened very carefully to my Liberal colleagues. I've listened to some of the commentary from these witnesses. And I guess to a Canadian observer who is not entirely familiar with the circumstances that surrounded the creation of this particular meeting, one would think that all is well in Canada, that everything is working as it's intended to work. The CSIS is working appropriately, that the CBSA is working appropriately, law enforcement's working appropriately, and the government is doing its job. Well, that can't be furthest from the truth. The number one responsibility of Justin Trudeau and his government, number one responsibility of the CBSA and CSIS, is to keep Canadians safe. Not some of the time, all of the time. And what has happened here is we were within a hair's breadth, minutes, hours, potentially days away of a mass casualty on the Toronto Jewish community. So clearly this wasn't hatched overnight by the two accused. They were probably planning for days, weeks, months, all under the radar of CSIS, all under the radar of immigration, all under the radar of CBSA, all under the radar of our law enforcement. So I've got one phrase to say to this committee, to this committee and to Canadians. Thank God for France. Thank God for French intelligence that gave CSIS the tip. This wasn't a national in France who was planning something against Canadians. This was an individual that we granted Canadian citizenship to that completely fell under the radar map until a tip went to CSIS. And then CSIS got the RCMP involved, and we stopped what could have been a significant mass casualty event. And I'm sorry to all the witnesses, you failed in your responsibilities to keep us safe. You didn't do your job. There, but the grace of God and good French intelligence, they are behind bars where they should be. Now, I listened very carefully to Mr. McCrory's words. We have a robust, we have a thorough system. Our reviews of citizens or of individuals coming into our country, it takes time. You talked about what Canadians expect. Well, sir, I can tell you that I've got reports from news media that strongly suggests that the two accused in custody is by no means a one-off. In fact, I'm going to read from this report. This is from the National Post from a few weeks ago. American authorities recently announced the apprehension of 233 terrorist suspects seeking entry from Canada into the United States. Were you aware of that, CSIS?
I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm not familiar with the direct reference that you
Sure.
may be alleging to in the meeting.
How about Mr. McCrory? Was CBSA aware of this?
Again, like my colleague, I'm not aware of the direct
Wow.
reference that you're speaking.
233 would-be terrorists walking the streets of Canada, all under the radar map of this Prime Minister, this government, and our professional public service and our security agency that wanted to get in the United States and wreak havoc in that country. And they were walking freely. We do, and I support my friend and colleague Mr. Motz's assessment. We have a broken system, and I hope to dear God, for the sake of the safety of Canadians, you identify very quickly and robustly where the breakdown happened and fire the individuals who didn't do their job. Now, Ms. Danmoff talks about how difficult it is to access the dark web. Well, you know what? Canadians aren't expecting Ms. Danmoff to protect us. We're expecting CSIS, law enforcement, and the government who has access to the dark web. And this should have been on your radar map, and you failed us. There again, but the grace of God and good intelligence from France. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Did anyone wish to respond? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I would like to repeat my earlier testimony that I would refute the premise that this was a failure, in that the good work of CSIS and our law enforcement partners between the time when CSIS received the information in June of 2024 and the time of the arrests on July 28th, and the fact that these individuals are in custody is a testimony to the good work and professionalism of those officers in all of our agencies. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We go now to Mr. Gerritsen for 6 minutes, please.
I'm surprised that Mr. Brock is so fond of France, considering the fact that he recently went there and got immediately called back to Canada by his boss after he took 2 plane tickets, I think, to finally make it there. But nonetheless, I do want to assure that the witnesses today know that not everybody around this table, or indeed Canadians, feel the same way that Mr. Brock does. What you just saw there was his stunt for social media, which he will use later, and most likely to raise money for the Conservative Party of Canada, and it was nothing more than that. My question to you is this. All of the focus today seems to have been on the fact that individuals entered into Canada that had a plan all along. But it is, whether or not that's true or not, we will let the courts determine that and appropriately deal with it. But my question is this. Is it not true that a lot of people who become radicalized, it happens to after they're already here? So you don't have to be somebody who is radicalized, enter to Canada. You can actually already be in Canada or a Canadian citizen to become radicalized. Is that true?
Mr. Chair, thank you. As I believe we mentioned earlier this morning, that the work of security services and National Security Agency is continuous. And as I mentioned earlier, again, that is with regards to threats that come from without Canada and from within.
And from within Canada. So that answers my question, because it wasn't actually that long ago, I believe it was in 2019, that in Kingston, a very similar circumstance to exactly what we're discussing here today occurred, where an individual had become radicalized and had set up a plan and to commit a terrorist act. But as a result of another informant who happened to be an FBI informant, that plot did not occur. The house that this individual had been supposedly bringing materials to prepare a bomb was located 3 blocks from the school, the elementary school that I went to when I was a child. I want to thank you for the incredible work that you do to keep us safe. We have been sitting here and subject to, especially that last rant by Mr. Brock, as though you are failures. You are not failures. You are keeping Canadians safe. And what I had to listen to there moments ago, knowing what you know and knowing how you know the processes and how they work, to have sat there and just taken what he said to you shows an incredible amount of discipline, at least as from the position that I'm sitting in. And you should all be personally commended for being able to do that. Notwithstanding that, Mr. Brock tried to imply that there were many Canadians or people from Canada that the U.S. had turned away because for people that he was identifying as terrorists. Can you tell us how many people the CBSA turns away in a given year from entering into Canada?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. As I've noted previously, there's probably 2 fundamental moments in which we're turning people away. So one is prior to embarkation, where our National Targeting Center is reviewing the...
No, I understand. I'm living on time.
You just want
how many people? I know the answer if you don't.
7,500 no boards in 2023, and then over 37,000 allowed to leave.
Over 37,000 people. That would be just over 100 a day. CBSA is turning away for people entering to Canada. Because Mr. Brock paints a very different picture. He paints a picture as though the border from Canada going into the United States is open and free for everyone to travel every way. You folks and the agencies that you represent and the departments that you represent do an incredible job if you're turning away 38,000 people within the last year from entering in. So notwithstanding the hyped up rhetoric and what you've had to be subject to listening to, I just want to conclude by thanking you for the incredible work that you do. We never want to see situations like this arise as to what did. We never want to allow people to enter into this country that have plans that they would like to, act in a manner as described in what's happening. But at least when somebody does slip through, you're still there because, as you said, you have multiple checks and balances and multiple layers in place to protect Canadians. And I'm not only seeing it here, but I saw it in my hometown where this happened in 2019. And because of the relationships that you have with other countries, because of the collaboration that you have with other countries, despite the politics that goes on in this room, we are safer. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Gerritsen. Does anyone wish to respond? Fair enough. On y va maintenant, Monsieur.
Now to Mr. Fortin. 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pick up on the last sentence from Mr. Gerritsen. He said, thanks to your good work, we're safer. I would agree with him. We're safer than we would be if you weren't doing good work. That being said, where I would differ in opinion with him is that I don't think the levels of security we currently have within Canadian borders are enough. I think we need to improve things. Perhaps I'm mistaken. I'm not a specialist in immigration or national security, but the situation before us today and for the next 5 meetings seems very concerning. And the fact that we can't obtain answers, and I understand very well, due to the secrecy necessary for the judicial process, I understand that, but it doesn't reassure people. And the answers we've had to date, with all due respect, do not reassure Quebecers and Canadians. I The two individuals, the father and the son, were arrested. They are in custody. I don't know in what conditions they're in custody. Are we able to know, are they isolated or are they around other criminals within the walls of a penitentiary? Could somebody answer that question?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We don't have the expertise at this, as witnesses here, to be able to respond to that question.
Donc, ils sont peut-être.
So they might be in shared cells or in contact with other criminals, perhaps other terrorists. That is something that is concerning to me. I don't know if at some point we could have an answer to that, perhaps at a later meeting. What has been done with the two individuals who were arrested? That's important to me. Another thing, those individuals, the father and the son, do they have other family members here in Canada? Are there procedures or screening done with other members of their family? Is somebody able to answer that?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Due to the ongoing criminal proceedings, we can't provide any more details around this case.
Ouais. C'est à se demander pourquoi les libéraux ont proposé.
So I wonder why the Liberals proposed these meetings. If you knew at the outset we wouldn't be able to have answers to important questions. I understand not talking about the case of the two individuals. I'm happy to look at the general process, but even when we talk about the general process, it seems a little nebulous. You say that the process is perfect, that it's working very well, that you don't need more people working with you. You don't need more in terms of budget. Everything is great. There hasn't been any failures, but everything can't be perfect. There are terrorists on our streets. Mr. Brock was talking about 233 would-be terrorists that were stopped at the United States. I had questions about that. I don't know what period that was. And were they stopped at the border? Where are they? I didn't have any answers on that. Do you have answers about that, at least? I don't think it has to do with the two individuals who were stopped.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm unfamiliar with the specific reference that the member made. However, I can speak to the fact that we, as the IRCC and with our partners at the CBSA, work very closely with our partners in the U.S. In fact, we meet every 2 weeks, so biweekly with them at senior levels to look at issues related to migration and border security at our shared border.
Madame Zafar.
Ms. Zafar, earlier it was said that when an individual arrives at the Canadian border from a third safe country like the United States, the agreement states that they should be returned, that they shouldn't come into Canada. Am I mistaken when I say that or not? And secondly, what are the exceptions set out to let somebody come in when they come from a third party, a safe third party?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
In regards to the Safe Third Country Agreement, as my colleague mentioned, the agreement does have some limited exceptions in which if an individual were to arrive in the U.S. first and then try to claim asylum in Canada, they would be permitted to claim asylum in Canada. In the case of a family exemption, as my colleague from the CBSA did discuss earlier, family members, an individual who arrives first in the U.S. and then comes to Canada to claim asylum, if they have a family member in Canada who is a citizen, a permanent resident, a convention refugee, or in some cases, someone who has a pending refugee claim, is permitted to claim asylum in Canada. My understanding is that this allows families to be kept together when they're seeking protection. With regards to any further exemptions in the STCA, it's not my area of expertise.
Si j'ai bien compris, Madame Zafar.
If I've understood correctly, Ms. Zafar, the case before us, the son came into Canada because the father was already here. But before letting him come in, he was coming from a safe third country, and so he said it was because there was a member of his family in Canada. So would there not be an extra screening step regarding the situation of that family? With the case before us, there was somebody who committed terrorist or violence abroad. Is there not a check at that point?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. With the chronology that was provided to the committee earlier today, I can't speak to any further details about the cases. However, with the chronology, the son did come to Canada, according to the chronology, at the Fort Erie land border on February 17th, 2020. If we look at the chronology of the father, in 2020, the father was already a convention refugee in Canada. With regards to security screening in general, all in-Canada asylum claims, so this would be considered an in-Canada asylum claim because it was made at the border, are subject to 100% comprehensive security screening. What is comprised of that comprehensive security screening, I could turn to my colleague at the CBSA for further details.
Merci, Madame Zafar.
Thank you, Ms. Zafar.
One of the other documents that were shared with the committee members is a document that outlines it 8 steps. I think it's 8 steps that outlines the kind of security screening we go through. And so from a visa application point of view, in the case of asylum applicants, they get 100% comprehensive security screening, and that is done both by CBSA and CSIS. I'll talk a little bit about what CBSA does. Again, when we do that comprehensive security screening, we're trying to understand who this person is, their travel history, where they're coming from. We don't look at every file exactly the same way. We've got experts based on geography that mirrors what our colleagues in other agencies do. So they have a good understanding of where somebody's coming from, what we need to look for, where to look for it. We do open source searches on the net. We also run those names against and aliases and any other identifying information that we may have against our own internal intelligence and enforcement databases. Based on what we find there, we may go further and seek information from domestic security partners and if need be international security partners. In some instances, that's a fairly rapid process. In other instances, we need to do a request for information that takes some more time, but we do take the time to do it. We do a very thorough review. We're always looking to either negate concerns that might be identified or confirm them. If we reach the reasonable grounds to believe threshold, we'll provide a recommendation to our colleagues at IRCC. This is asylum. It'll go to the Immigration Refugee Board for a decision. Our colleagues in the service, the CSIS, will do a similar process.
Yeah. So thank you. Merci, Monsieur Fortin. We'll go now to Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We've covered a lot of ground in today's meetings, and I don't think there are many questions left to be asked that haven't already been covered extensively by several members from different parties. But I will say this. I suppose that by virtue of the fact that we had a successful arrest and good coordination amongst our policing services, both local and RCMP, and the fact that these individuals are now behind bars and court processes that are going. I suppose by those facts, we can chalk this up to success. And I do want to echo colleagues in thanking the members of the CBSA, of the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, of the service, and of the RCMP. Many of your members work in communities like mine, and I've been at this committee long enough to sincerely appreciate the efforts that your members put into their jobs every single day. I know it can be a thankless task, and I know at times that they are very much the unsung heroes, and many times the public isn't even aware that you are doing this work, but I know enough to know that your members are working hard every day on our behalf and on hopefully on the committee's behalf. I'd like to thank them. But I would like to also, here's the little asterisk though in my statement. It is of concern that this plot was in the advanced stages that it was, and that these 2 suspects were in Canada in the first place. And I hope that all of our witnesses can appreciate today that Canadians are taking this seriously. This committee is taking this seriously. And so I sincerely hope that you will conduct your internal investigations with haste and with thoroughness, because we absolutely do want to make sure that a situation like this never occurs again. So I'll end there, Mr. Chair, by thanking our witnesses for being with us today. And I sincerely look forward to when we return in September, and because we will all be submitting further witnesses to continue the study, and hopefully this committee will be able to produce a good report and recommendations, not only on what the executive branch should be doing, but perhaps on what policy tools, changes we need, or changes to the legislation and whatnot. But I'll end there, Mr. Chair, and thanks again to the witnesses and to all of the members of their respective agencies for the work that they do.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. I'll also, again, offer you the opportunity to respond if you wish. Mr. McCrory.
I would just like to assure, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to assure the member that we do take this seriously, and as in terms of the review that we've talked about, it will be a thorough review. The minister's been very clear that he wants it as soon as possible, and again, we're if there are changes that are required, we'll make those changes.
Thank you. So that wraps up round one of this on the second hour. So I think we can go into round two, an abbreviated round two, which would probably end with Mr. McGregor. If that's okay, we'll carry on with Mr. Caputo for 5 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for everybody being here. This is my first round with this group here. And Ms. Lloyd, thank you so much for being here the whole day. I know it's probably getting a bit tiring at this point, so we do thank you for that. And we are thankful as well about the fact that what we saw here, what's been widely reported, and what's culminated in criminal charges, we're obviously very happy that our security and law enforcement personnel foiled what would have been a catastrophic act. We're very thankful for that. At the same time, I echo what my colleague, Monsieur Fortin, said, where, I wrote down here that we've gotten the answers, but the answers don't feel all that reassuring. So I'm trying to look at this. I'm trying to take off my hat as a lawyer or even as a parliamentarian. So I try to look through the lens of my father, for instance. And so I'm looking at this through the lens of the ordinary Canadian. And, for instance, with you, Mr. McQuarrie, when you started out, you said, I'm not sure that there are any failures. And you talked about the robust process. With all due respect, I'm not sure that satisfies the average Canadian. I'm not sure that satisfies my father. So I'm going to go through each of you. Ms. Lloyd, can you see how, given what we know, this is what we know. This person came in to Canada in 2017. They were granted a permanent residency and granted citizenship in 2024, despite there being evidence online of active acts with ISIS. Can you see how the average Canadian is not comforted by this notion of reassurance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, Honourable Member, the way I will respond to your question is that I think Canadians, in fact, should be very reassured by the comments that both myself and my colleagues have made here today, in that we take our security screening responsibilities very seriously. We have intelligence professionals and officers at each of our 3 agencies that do their work on a daily basis with rigor and professionalism. They made the best decisions available to them on the information that was available to them at that time as it relates to the security screening responsibilities they had on this and any file. And most importantly,
I'm not trying to cut you off. We do have limited time. But again, I'm not asking whether Canadians should be reassured. And I'll ask Ms. Gildas. I'm not asking whether Canadians should be reassured based on what you've said. What I'm saying is, can you understand how Canadians have serious questions here, and that perhaps this is not a situation, and Canadians shouldn't necessarily, and are justified in seeing this as a situation where there were no failures. Can you see how the average Canadian would see that, Ms. Gill?
I'll defer this question to my colleague, Madame Zafar. Thank you.
Okay, Madame.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We came to the committee today and disclosed documents, which we did so with the effort and intention of being able to meet the committee's objectives of understanding the immigration security screening process and also maintaining the confidence of Canadians in the immigration security screening and the immigration systems. I understand that there are still outstanding questions. However, due to the ongoing criminal proceedings and and other protections that we have outlined in the chronology, we aren't able to go into further details.
And I'm not asking about that. I'm saying somebody came here in 2017. They were this close to committing a terrorist act. And will nobody on the panel acknowledge that Canadians are justified in being afraid, that Canadians can still have questions, that perhaps this isn't a situation of there were no failures? Is there anybody that will acknowledge that on the panel?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The system that we have in place is an ecosystem. As the statements that were made earlier, there is no one single point in which we rely on for the safety and security of Canada. So it starts with the initial touch point that we as IRCC have with an applicant. We have the Before Canada piece. We've talked about CBSA and their ability to then use any additional information before an individual boards an aircraft. The point of entry, if there's additional information that has been received where CBSA would be able to identify those threats. And then we have the domestic network as well.
I understand the processes, and you've been through that very clearly. And that's not what I'm asking about. And for the last 4 minutes, I've been asking about how the average Canadian should see this and the lens through which they should be looking at, and whether the average Canadian, whether you can see. And with all due respect, you're here in the security apparatus. Just one moment, please. You're here. And the average Canadian is on the ground.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure that they should be satisfied.
Thank you, Mr. Caputo.
Thank you.
Any last response? No. Okay, we go now to Mr. McDonald for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I just want to echo some of the sentiments of my colleagues in regards to the job that the witnesses do each and every day to keep Canadians safe. There's not a job out there that we can't improve, that any of us do at any point in time in our lives, and we'll continue to strive for excellence. And this is part of the process. But no one really talked about it. And I'm going to direct my questions to Miss Gates Flaherty. Can you talk a little bit about the Greater Toronto Area Integrated National Security Enforcement Team that actually made the arrests? Can you give us an overview of that team?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm here in my capacity as the Director General of the Canadian Criminal Real-Time Identification Services. So I don't have in-depth information about those teams, but certainly could come back to the committee in writing with information about the work of those groups.
Is there anyone else on the panel that can speak about the Greater Toronto Area Integrated National Security Enforcement? Oh, okay, I'll move on. So I want to be clear on something else as well. Just on the trilateral agreements with each department.
Mr. McDonald, could you maybe make sure your mic is in the right place? You're kind of coming in and out. Try that again.
How's that?
That's better.
Okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. I'll repeat just to be clear for clarity on the process of the trilateral. CSIS and CBSA provide security advice to IRCC. Is that correct?
That is correct.
However, CSIS and CBSA do not make decisions on applications. Is that correct as well?
That's correct.
So how does IRCC consider advice from CSIS and CBSA then when the process is completed to that point?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. When a comprehensive security screening is concluded, CBSA will provide a recommendation as well as an assessment and information for the IRCC officer to consider. That recommendation can come back as favorable, at which point it indicates to the officer that there are no further concerns from a security screening perspective. It could come back as non-favorable, which indicates that there are concerns, or it could come back as inconclusive, which could indicate to the officer that more information is required for a recommendation. Our officers will then take that into consideration, and there's a number of things that they can do with, for instance, a non-favorable recommendation. We are subject and we do abide by the rules of procedural fairness, as I mentioned earlier. So what that means is that if we have adverse information on an applicant, the officer will provide the opportunity for that applicant to address that adverse information. The information that's received back, whether it's through an interview or in writing, is then assessed again by the officer before making a final decision. In that final decision, if it is an approval, the visa will be issued. If it is a refusal, after having given the applicant the opportunity for procedural fairness, the decision maker, so the officer, will put down all of their findings in their decision in writing to indicate to the applicant the refusal.
Thank you. And so, Ms. Savar, on this process, the final say on the refugee claimants would that be the RPD?
Yes,
Who has the final say?
It would be the Refugee Protection Division of the Immigration and Refugee Board.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question, and I know it was brought up earlier on facial recognition. Is there any other countries in the world actually using facial recognition for security intelligence? Does anybody have any idea?
Mr. Chair, I would decline to comment on the capabilities and methodologies used by other countries, and would remind the committee that other countries may do so under other pieces of legislation or authorities that may or may not apply in the Canadian context.
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd. And further note, just on the whole process of our trilateral, is this something that's very similar being used very similar in other countries, or can we compare?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm not familiar with the methodologies that other countries use for immigration screening at this time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. That's all for me.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, witnesses.
On y va maintenant à Monsieur Fortin.
Now we move to Mr. Fortin again. 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question will be for Mr. McCrory. Mr. McCrory, the targets keep increasing. We had 55,000 asylum seeker requests, and they've gone up year over year over year. 92,000 in 2024 asylum requests. The targets for 2024 have just kept on increasing. So there is more and more demand, more and more people who want to come to Canada, and more who are coming in. Do you not believe that the resources to properly screen these requests should go up in tandem?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
In fact, in 2020, from fiscal year 22-23 to 23-20, sorry, from 22-23 to 23.
Forget about the numbers, Mr. McCrory. We just have a number. So the resources go up.
Is more resources would allow us to do more, to clear more files. We take the time necessary to clear to do the thorough research in every file that we have. And so what you're seeing is an increase in our inventory. So it's and issues around our timeliness. So the issue is we're sacrificing our efficiency for our effectiveness. We're making sure that we do a good job on the files that we do review. The time and energy it takes us to do that is having impact on the number of files that we can process at any given time, and so you are seeing our inventory go up.
Have you requested from the Canadian government an increase in resources so you can act more quickly, so you can obtain information on asylum seekers, on immigration?
With our colleagues in agencies and departments.
Not do you cooperate, but have you made requests for more resources?
Yes, we work through our colleagues, for example, Immigration Refugee Citizens of Canada, as they look at refugee levels or immigration levels, for example. We collaborate with them in terms of what resources may be required.
Have you had increases in your budget over the past 2 years? And if so, what amount?
Désolé,
I'm sorry, I don't know if I understand.
What I was trying to say is in the last 2 fiscal years, we did see our budget in this particular area go up by about 15%.
Have you hired more people to do screening?
We use that money either to hire new employees or to pay overtime to the employees we have, or we sometimes bring in surge capacity from other parts of the agency to assist with the work.
Merci, Monsieur Fortin. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Fortin. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. McGregor, you have the hammer. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. I don't have any further questions for the witnesses, so I'm okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
I can take that 2.5 minutes, Mr. Chair.
I think in fairness, we'll call this a day. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for your fortitude in bearing through us for all of these many hours.